5 men have sat upon the featherweight throne: the king, the notorious, the blessed, the great, El Matador. The division has been graced with many of the greatest fighters the sport has ever known. Their reigns are sometimes brief sparks that inspire an era, other times they are resolute, lasting years as a dynasty atop the featherweights. But as these 5 men's legacies became entwined and their pursuits of greatness crossed paths, it told the story of one of the most distinguished divisions the sport will ever know. So over the next 4 hours, we will explore the intersection of these fighters' legacies, how their stories weaved in and out of one another to create a tapestry of violence, the knockouts, the controversies, the thrill and the agony, and how underdogs in life and in bloodshed climbed to the pinnacle of this division. To tell the story of the 145-pound division, we must start with perhaps one of the biggest moments the sport has ever known, a time that many of you will know well. Sponsored by War Thunder. It's December 12th, 2015, UFC 194, the culmination of over a year of build-up in anticipation for one of the biggest fights the UFC has ever put on. The pay-per-view has sold an earth-shattering 1.2 million times. The world is quite literally watching. In the blue corner, an enigmatic Irishman crouches low, staring down his prey, mouthing the words, "Let's go, boy." Joe Rogan comments that he looks relaxed and extremely calm. In the red corner looms the UFC Featherweight Champion of the world, a man who hasn't lost in 10 years. With 7 title defenses and 16 finishes to his name, he is considered, at this time, the greatest featherweight of all time. And here he stares across at an Irishman who has never known what it means to be the undisputed champion of the world, never known what it means to defend a title. Jose, with a long and storied history of violence, should, all things considered, be matching McGregor's calmness, but he does not. He looks like he is feeling the pressure of this moment. For over a year, McGregor has exposed Aldo to a relentless and brutal world tour, one that has been hailed as the greatest example of a psychological destruction of a fighter the combat world has ever known, one that had ascended Conor into otherworldly levels of popularity. But fights are not won with words. The ref calls a start to the contest, the crowd peaks in bloodthirsty screams, and one punch is about to change not only the featherweight division forever, but the world of MMA as well. But to understand the end of a reign, we must go back to its beginning. It starts with a dream. It always starts with a dream. It's 1986, and a child's face is burning.
When he was a little baby, his mother put him in a little baby cart, and his brothers and sisters were playing, and he bumped into it.
And she hit the grill with him, face first onto the grill.
Ele diz que a culpa foi minha, que eu que joguei ele. Eu disse, cara, eu vou te falar, tu era bebê, eu era criança, como é que eu vou lembrar que eu te joguei e aconteceu isso no teu rosto?
They called him Scarface, but his real name was Jose Aldo Jr., and his life was not easy.
Pois é, minha infância foi em Manaus, Amazonas, capital do estado, e minha infância.
A finger of grey stone jutting out of the dense greenery of the Amazon rainforest, Jose lived in a small village, in the forest itself, miles from the city.
Infância pobre, né? De origem humilde. E minha infância foi na rua, jogando bola. Até quando eu entrei pra luta. Onde que eu tinha um sonho de ser jogador de futebol, né? Então, só via jogando futebol de manhã, tarde e noite, ia pro colégio, voltava.
It's a story that we hear a million times. Those kids Brazil over, dreaming a collective dream of escaping poverty through success in soccer. But when a whole nation is seeking the same escape plan as you, it becomes essentially impossible to find a path out.
Acho pela violência que eu tava jogando, né? Eu acho que eu tava esquecendo um pouco mal. Eu acho que de jogar futebol, eu esqueci um pouco do sonho. Então, tava batendo mais do que jogando. Então, acho que ele viu, ele falou, fazendo um salto, tocando um berimbau, e um rapaz namorava em frente da minha casa com a menina e era instrutor de jiu-jitsu.
Quickly he began winning local tournaments and climbing the belt system. He was truly incredible at the sport, and so for the next few years, he trained. At the age of 15, Jose had proven his worth in the sport, and so there was only one natural step forward to take. A world tournament for under-18s was taking place in Rio de Janeiro later in the year, and Aldo wanted to compete, prove his mettle against all those other kids chasing this dream. Jose told his mother that he wanted to see the sea for the first time, to see the hustle and bustle of one of the biggest cities in the world. His talent in jiu-jitsu was clear for all to see, but now he had to take that risk in order to create a life greater than the struggles that lay in wait for him in this small village. Winning the tournament would open many doors. His mother told him that he was a dreamer, and nothing could be closer to the truth. Luckily, Jose would find funding from the government, who would pay for his flight out there. Over 2,500 miles Jose would travel just a month later. He would be dashed by salt-laden air as he stood on a beach for the first time in his life. Butterflies in his stomach. The tournament loomed just the next day. This was all surreal for a boy who had ever only known poverty in the jungles of the Amazon rainforest. The next day, Aldo would claim second place in the tournament, and with it, gain the attention of many top teachers of the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu the world over. Over the next 2 years, Aldo continued to climb the ranks of the Jiu-Jitsu scene and had even secured his brown belt, but Aldo wanted more. With little more than a dream and his clothes, Aldo left for Rio de Janeiro again, leaving behind all he had ever known in pursuit of something no 17-year-old could truly understand or comprehend, but some force, some power, something was propelling him forward, deep into the heart of the unknown.
Consegui o dia da passagem, comprei a passagem. Me lembro até hoje, eu fui a pé do Santos Dumont.
Within a year, a new sport had found him, and he was all in. MMA had sunk its teeth into him.
Vitória de Luciano! Banksman! 繰り返してロー蹴ってます。これもどうでしょうか。Aí Marcel Luiz. However, he's very accomplished amateur fighter. Some hard leg that goes in there from Aldo. And young slipping.
In a little over a year, Jose would go on a rampage, his record totaling 7-1, impressive to say the least. But 8 fights in 1 year and 2 months is just simply insane, and the best bit of it all, every single victory was a finish, knockout and submissions, all in the first round. You simply couldn't dream of a better introduction into the sport, and the loss, well, to be honest, it was a nothing burger. Right at the end of back-to-back fights, Aldo would move up a weight class to lightweight, and unfortunately be outsized, getting submitted in the second round. But that loss early in his career only served as a catalyst to greatness. Still undefeated as a featherweight, he returned to his more natural division and went on a warpath. 2 great wins, some tough opponents on the regional scene, and then finally a fantastic opportunity to compete overseas in Pancrase against a Japanese prospect. With 3 more wins in a row since his loss, and his record now totaling 10-1, meant that he was scouted by the big dogs. The WEC came knocking. In many ways, the WEC is one of the most revered and nostalgic homes of combat competition in the history of MMA. If you ask many early MMA fans what some of their favorite fights were, they would be pointing directly to the WEC to provide answers. The UFC had purchased them back in 2006, and they would go on to act as a sort of sister company that held the smaller weight divisions, featherweight and below. Even in 2007, the UFC was yet to expand its roster below 155 pounds, owing to the fact that all its fighters were smaller. Even the cage that the practitioners fought in was smaller, sitting at 25 feet. The WEC was responsible for making a name for many of the stars that would become household names in the UFC. For featherweight and bantamweight, many consider it the lineal history legacy of the UFC divisions themselves. That is why when fighters are introduced in the UFC to this day, former champions of the WEC are still given their former prestige by Bruce Buffer, and so many might consider Cole Escovedo the true lineal featherweight champion of the world, a man who had defended the featherweight title once in the WEC before being bested by the California Kid, a man we will get onto shortly. But for now, we will continue with Jose's journey through the organization. Before we get to Jose dropping bombs in the octagon, let's talk about War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and is available now for free on PC, console and mobile devices. Take command of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. And best of all, customize them to your liking and make Sean O'Malley proud with countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles including community-created ones, battle your shiny combat machines in all environments, from the South Pole to the sweltering desert. Feel every shot, every explosion with the game's immersive sound effects that place you in the cockpit of the most powerful war machines of our time. And if you are like me and prefer to destroy the enemy on the move, War Thunder now has an all-new mobile version available on iOS and Android, allowing you to take to the battlefield wherever you go. The mobile version features intuitive controls, impressive graphics, and the familiar massive multiplayer warfare. Join a worldwide community of over 70 million players in epic PvP battles today and delve into the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. With an unmatched wealth of high-quality content to discover, there's simply no better game suited for fans of military history. Play War Thunder now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile devices. Use my links in the pinned comment or the video description to sign up. New players and those who haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack on PC or console that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account, available for a limited time only, so don't miss it. Back in 2008, when Jose Aldo stepped into the WEC cage for the first time, he wasn't exactly blowing the ceiling off the arena. He was just another grey man amidst the others pining for notoriety in the sport. The WEC chucked Aldo a carcass to gain a highlight reel off of. His opponent was a washed and rather weathered MMA vet that had tiptoed into the sport all the way back in 1998. He had been the Shooto lightweight champion for some time, but it wasn't exactly the greatest competition. Case in point, every time he stepped outside of the organization of Shooto, he would get slapped about and lose, and that's exactly what Jose did, knocking him out halfway through the second round. He did so whilst competing on the same card as then featherweight champion Urijah Faber. Their paths would ultimately cross very soon, but there were still questions to be answered by the top dogs in the WEC, and he was about to put them all on notice.
This kid survived the snap. That's it. Oh, look at that knee from these men. Will they get a shot at the champion?
Aldo, in just a calendar year, would string 4 more knockouts, including the fastest knockout in WEC history when he flying kneed Cub Swanson into the next decade in just 8 seconds, a knockout that is still discussed with admiration to this day. These just simply emphatic performances made him a must-see for WEC fans, and in a very short time indeed, Aldo went from a nobody living in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro to earning a world title shot in one of the best promotions the sport could offer. Whilst Jose probably imagined that he would be facing the man that was top billed on the card of his WEC debut, the reality was much different. Urijah, just a year previously, had lost his featherweight title to the man that Jose had to face now, Mike Brown. Hailing from Portland, Maine, he wrestled his way through high school and college, building a solid foundation, eventually turning pro in MMA in 2001. Brown debuted in the WEC in June of 2008 after going 18-4 in his 6-year-long career. He would outclass Jeff Curran with his wrestling-heavy, ground-and-pound approach to earn a unanimous decision. That win earned him a shot at Urijah Faber's featherweight title at WEC 36 in November. Against the odds, Brown stunned the division's poster boy, catching Faber with a sharp uppercut and finishing him with a first-round TKO. He would end up defending it twice. First, he smashed Leonard Garcia with a first-round arm triangle choke at WEC 39, then outlasting Faber in their second fight in a 5-round war at WEC 41 in June of 2009. Riding a 10-fight win streak, Brown was a powerhouse, and many people felt that he had far too much experience for the Brazilian. He had the grit and skills to shut down this young and hungry up-and-comer, and even if Aldo could win, it was going to require the mustering of everything Scarface had. But yet again, Aldo did what he had always done at featherweight: win. A massive upset, stringing together his 6th finish in the WEC in a row. Mike Brown laid out as a new man was crowned the WEC champion of the world. Jose Aldo had done it, but crowning moments don't last long. There is always what is next, and Aldo was now no longer chasing the title, but rather now he was the defender of it, and so he was quickly thrusted into his first bout as champion. For the longest time, the WEC featherweight division had belonged to one man who had not only made the division what it is, but actually the sport in general. Urijah Faber, at a very young age, and at a very early point in his career had become a legend, a household name, and was essentially the poster boy for the WEC. Case in point, almost 15 years later, and organizations are still trying to use his name to sell events. Uriah was the second man to ever call himself the featherweight champion of the world, and he would go on to defend it 5 times against some of the best the sporting world would ever know. The likes of bantamweight GOAT Dominic Cruz and UFC Hall of Famer and former UFC lightweight world champion Jens Pulver. Uriah was marketable and charismatic, and many hailed him as the man that had put the featherweights on the map and was single-handedly creating a craze for the lighter divisions. It was no wonder that for Jose's first defense as the WEC king that he would be put against this man. It was the perfect matchup. Either the organization would get their pretty boy back on top, or Jose would legitimize himself off of Uriah's name value. To prove just how big of a star Uriah was, their title fight would headline the event, even though Benson Henderson and Donald Cerrone were fighting for the lightweight title in the co-main event, going completely against tradition, where champions are stacked in order of lightest to heaviest. It was also the only time in the history of the WEC that an event would be a pay-per-view, eventually selling 175,000 buys.
These guys are the pioneers of the lightweight division, you know, and these guys deserve to be on pay-per-view. This card deserves to be on pay-per-view, and if you're a fight fan, you're going to be buying it on Saturday night. Fuckers better buy this shit. You've been working hard.
You know, I'm fighting for a world title, so it doesn't get any better than that.
I love a guy that you know, has goals like that. Like, that wants to become the best ever, wants to leave a legacy. I want to be the first guy to win belts in 3 different weight classes. Yeah, I want to fight Uriah Faber in Sacramento. I want to beat him in his own house. I love guys like that.
We're going to fight our hearts out. I mean, we're going to be going for the kill. As far as excitement goes, I think you're looking at 2 of the most exciting guys on the planet. To have us fight each other, it's going to be crazy.
Aldo's strategy was clear from the opening bell: target and destroy Faber's lead leg.
That's the worst pain I've ever been through.
It literally felt like a bat was hitting my leg. That changed the game for me in that fight. I literally was, you know, hobbling after the 3rd round.
Just look up Uriah's leg, and you'll see some just disgusting pictures. Looks like a dead body.
Yeah, it looks horrible.
It was black and blue from my hip to my ankle, and it took about 1.5 months to recover, and you know, just thinking about it can get my leg tingling.
By the fight's end, Faber was limping, unable to mount a significant offense, his leg mangled over the course of a brutal 25 minutes. On top of this, Jose picked Uriah apart with jabs and shots to the body, and even took him to the ground and roughed him up there. He was a complete and utter shutout, and there was nothing that Faber, the once featherweight great, could do to turn the fight in his favor. Admittedly, I started watching the UFC back at UFC 200 and had dabbled a little bit around the time that Conor had become a star previously. Call me a casual all you want for that, but grow up, it's been 10 years. The thing is, I have a distinct memory of this sport trying to cinch its hooks into me back when this fight actually happened. My brother shoved a laptop in front of my face, presumably whilst I was in the midst of a Fallout 3 session, showing me a video of a bum-chin retired skateboarder, supported by crutches, showing off his leg that had been turned into a Krabby Patty, and then he proceeded to talk about how brutal of a fighter Jose was. Whilst it was gnarly to see, I was really more interested in putting Harold out of his misery, the poor barky bastard. But it's funny to look back and see how it is these moments that pulled people into the sport, or at least tried to, that is. Jose walked away with a unanimous decision victory and secured the first defense of his title, and whilst it wasn't the most action-packed victory like his previous 6 finishes had been, it was certainly considered one of his most impressive. In Jose's second defense of the WEC Featherweight title, he would be taking on Manny Gambarian, but Jose would prove yet again that there are levels to this game, knocking Manny out inside 2 rounds, and once again declaring that he was indeed the greatest featherweight in the world at the time. One amazing thing about this WEC event that really encapsulates how popular this organization was at the time was that on Versus, where the card would take place, it drew in just shy of 500,000 viewers. For context, an average UFC fight night, now almost 15 years later, and billions of dollars of investment later, gets around the same viewership. You got to remember that this was just some organization featuring the smaller guys, and yet Jose in the main event was still pulling in massive numbers. And so, well, the path this story goes down next is pretty much expected, all things considered.
Ariel Helwani standing alongside the president of the UFC, Mr. Dana White. And Dana, thank you so much for the time today. I want to take you back to July. That's when I first heard a rumor that WEC was merging with the UFC. And since then, I've gathered a lot of information. Now I confidently present it to you and ask you the question, is WEC merging with the UFC?
Yes.
When?
The last fight for the WEC will be in December.
October 28, 2010, the merger begins. Jose Aldo is touted to become a UFC featherweight champion at some unknown time in the next couple weeks, and Dominic Cruz would face Scott Jorgensen in the final WEC event on December 16th that same year. The winner will claim the final WEC bantamweight championship, and at the exact same time, have the inaugural UFC bantamweight strap wrapped around their waist. The event would signal the finalization of 2 new weight classes joining the UFC, taking the total to 7 different weight limits, and as its roster of fighters grew, it only made sense to add more weight classes. For the featherweights, their final few fights in the organization were essentially meaningless. Their future only had one destination, and that was the UFC.
Just heard the news, the WEC and the UFC merger, and I'm stoked. This whole time it's been the same company. We're finally going to be under one banner, which means bigger opportunities.
The WEC had done all the work, putting the smaller weight divisions on the map, but ultimately they would fade into the annals of history, just another victim of the UFC monopoly. But its place in the archives of the sport cannot be understated. Uriah Faber and Jose Aldo had quickly become household names for any casual viewer, and had rightly become the inspiration for smaller fighters across the globe. The UFC's aggressive growth had consumed pride and Strikeforce, and presumably made any number of competition fade into obscurity. It's a shame that most fans of MMA won't ever remember the WEC for what it was, the organization that provided a platform to see the rise of Donald Cerrone, the Showtime Kick, the Korean Zombie, and Dominic Cruz's legendary pioneering run as the bantamweight king. In November of 2010, Jose would be ushered onto the canvas of the UFC octagon at UFC 123. There, the WEC featherweight division fizzled from reality, and instead, he was offered a UFC championship belt.
Alright guys, this is it. It's official. He is now UFC featherweight champion. Welcome to the UFC.
He was now promoted to the undisputed UFC featherweight champion of the world. No fight marked the occasion, no victory brought in a new era. Instead, it was politics as always that crowned a new time for the sport. One of my favorite videos of Jose, and one that has always stuck with me when I think of the man, is this one. It's a video in which he buys his first ever suit in preparation of him being declared the undisputed featherweight king of the world. It's a reminder of where this man had come from, dirt poor in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro at the age of 17, and before that, in the jungles of the Amazon itself. Nothing to his name, and now here he was, finally able to afford his first ever suit, and seeing how happy and meaningful it is to him is just really heartwarming. As for the rest of the men of the WEC, well, time was running out for them. In December, a month later, the 53rd event would roll around in a final waltz. Dominic Cruz, the bantamweight champion, would win his title against Scott Jorgensen and be crowned as the first and last of 2 different organizations. The WEC bowed out of the sport forever, left to fade into abstract memory as the UFC trudged onward towards supremacy. UFC 125 was just a month later and was meant to serve as the platform in which the King of Rio was to defend his throne for the first time against Joseph Crispy. But unfortunately, Aldo would be pulled from the card due to a neck injury. Instead, Josh would go on to face late replacement Dustin Poirier, who would, as an underdog, go on to beat the anticipated title challenger from bell to bell, pushing the diamond to the top of the pile at featherweight. He is a man that we'll hear more from in the future, no doubt. It's great to look back at these retrospectives and just see where exactly these men's UFC careers started. And here, the future lightweight great Dustin enters the UFC as a late replacement, taking on an almost featherweight title challenger. What a crazy sport. Just over a month later, Dana White would announce in the wake of Josh's letdown performance that the winner of Mark Hominick and George Roop would find themselves becoming the first man to take on Jose Aldo in the UFC. Mark Hominick was a pioneer of the sport and had many years previously fought in the UFC lightweight division. After leaving the organization, he found his groove going down and competing as a featherweight. Most recently, he had strung together a 4-fight win streak. and pulled ahead of his WEC peers in terms of the rankings. The fight against Roop was essentially a setup by the UFC. Roop was a journeyman at best, and was simply a punching bag for the UFC to get some highlight footage of Hominick kicking ass. Well, that's exactly what happened in the bout. Just a minute and a half into the competition, Hominick would knock the poor guy out and secure himself a contract to fight for the UFC Featherweight Championship. It was now time for Jose to prove himself on the main stage and under the brightest lights the featherweight division had ever seen.
Mark the Machine Hominick from Chelmsford, Ontario, a mixed martial arts fighter that fights with the UFC. I have an upcoming fight April 30th at the Rogers Center, fighting for the featherweight, the 145-pound world title.
Not a lot of smack talking going on between Aldo and Hominick. We know Mark is a classy guy, and Jose Aldo can't even speak the language.
Acho que você cai e você tem que levantar. Eu acho que essa sim, eu acho que você tem que cair e levantar. Essa é o maior aprendizado que eu tenho, que várias vezes eu caí, todas as vezes eu levantei, sempre para brigar.
Jose, like he's won fights in 9 seconds, so he's definitely, as soon as that bell rings, you have to be ready for him. This is the inaugural 145-pound featherweight UFC belt, so this is the first time this belt's been on the line.
Hominick versus Jose Aldo. 55,000 tickets sold for this Saturday night.
I have a baby due the week after the fight. You know, like things are in line, and I really truly believe that, you know, things in life happen for a reason.
After a quick touch of gloves, Hominick went straight for Aldo like a bull in a china shop. But a flurry of punches courtesy of the champion soon put a stop to the man they call the Machine. The fight was a masterclass from Aldo. Punches, leg kicks, body shots, takedown defense. The champion showcased it all. Hominick's face over the 25 minutes became distorted and broken by the never-ending assault. When it was all said and done, Aldo walked away defending the featherweight belt for the first time in the history of the sport. And what a win it was. A dominant and brutal unanimous decision, stamping his place atop the sport. Mark Hominick would never be the same fighter again. The Machine would go on to lose another 3 fights in a row, crushed by the extreme talent that featherweight had to offer. He fought for a world title in 2011, and by the end of 2012, Mark would never fight again, a footnote in Aldo's legacy. Just 3 months later, it was announced that Aldo had found his next challenger, Kenny Florian. Kenny Florian would be having his 3rd shot at UFC Gold, this time as a featherweight. And well, many were surprised that those who had been battling it out in the division for years in the WEC were snubbed. Kenny Florian had earned his shot by being one of the best lightweights the UFC had ever produced. It was also an interesting proposition that could offer the featherweights a little more validity if Kenny went down a weight class and won the belt. Well, now a tried and tested UFC vet had firm control of the reins to lead the division into legitimacy. If Jose won, well, he was showing the world that the featherweights always belonged here because they were more than capable of destroying the best the premier organization had to offer in the form of a former UFC title challenger. The pair would serve as the co-main event for UFC 136, sitting underneath Frankie Edgar's 3rd defense of the UFC lightweight title. It was a fantastic opportunity for Jose to really cement his place and continue his legacy.
Ladies and gentlemen, after 5 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for a decision. All 3 judges score this contest 49-46, declaring the winner by unanimous decision, and still the undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion of the World.
After 5 rounds, the judges' scorecards represented the dominance on display. 49-46 across the board. Unanimous decision for Aldo. The win stretched his streak to 14, solidifying his grip of the featherweight crown. The 35-year-old, larger and more experienced opponent was outclassed at every turn. Jose Aldo well and truly told the world the featherweights were here to stay, and Dana White couldn't have been happier. Kenny Florian had just lost his 3rd shot at UFC Gold, a defeat that marked the end of his fighting career. He was yet another fighter nudged into retirement by the Brazilian great. But Florian's story didn't end there. He transitioned into a new role, becoming one of the most respected analysts in MMA. His voice grew into a prominent and valued presence in the sports media landscape. Whilst his achievements inside the cage were impressive, it's arguably his insights and knowledge as an analyst that have left the most lasting and positive impact on the world of mixed martial arts. Up next for Jose was an undefeated prospect on the rise, Chad had entered the WEC just a year before it had been folded into the UFC as an undefeated fighter from California. Like most men who are small, muscly, and from California, he had naturally gravitated to Uriah Faber's up-and-coming squad of fierce hobbits, Team Alpha Male. He was one of their greatest prospects, as I said, undefeated in the sport, and a second-place Division I NCAA wrestling medalist. In the WEC, he would put in the work, getting 4 wins, and then joining the UFC from there, and he would string together a further 2 wins against some of the best the division had to offer. Now 11-0, young, hungry, he represented everything the UFC wanted as their next challenger for the UFC title. With the name value of fighting under the tutelage of Uriah Faber, it really was the perfect storm to hype up a fight in the organization, and so the UFC pulled out all the stops. Could the student avenge his vanquished master, or could the dominant champion cling to his place atop the sport? Well, the wrestling-heavy, ground-and-pound expert sought to challenge Jose in ways that he had never been. The date was set, UFC 142, January 2012.
UFC 142, the UFC returns to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and the UFC Featherweight Championship of the World will be defended by the champion, Jose Aldo, one of the very best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and he takes on the undefeated Chad Money Mendez in an outstanding matchup of opposing styles.
Being as I'm a wrestler, I'm a ground guy, so I think the blueprint's set, and I just got to train and get in there and do what I got to do.
People have been waiting to see the old Jose Aldo from the WEC. This is his breakthrough fight. He's in his own country. He's fighting, defending his title. It's the first time he's ever, or that weight division has ever headlined a UFC event. It's a big deal for this guy.
Get in there and I'm going to put it to him, so I definitely hope he's not looking past me at all.
Seconds on the clock here in round 1. And Aldo still trying really hard to separate those hands. He briefly does, but Mendez reconnects him and he's free. Oh! That's it! Trying to finish it! And it is all over!
Up until this point, Jose was a man who had finished most of his fights in his entire career, but he had yet to achieve a highlight reel-worthy moment in the UFC. That was until Chad Mendez, the man whose game plan was clear from the beginning, decided to chain wrestle and smother Jose up against the cage for essentially the whole of the first round. Jose may have been grabbing the fence to shut down this tactic, which is naughty, but Chad showed little variation in his determination to get the fight off the feet. And so when space was created in the last couple seconds of the first round, Chad's next move was obvious, a level change, and it was from there that he would eat a devastating knee courtesy of the Brazilian. But that wasn't the highlight. The highlight was soon to follow. In his hometown, Aldo jumped the cage into his adoring fans, creating one of the best moments this sport has ever seen. Aldo in the crowd swarmed by his satiated, bloodthirsty fans, the security scrambling to save him as he is hoisted upon their shoulders in celebration. If it wasn't obvious, it was now. Jose was dearly beloved, not only by his home crowd, but UFC fans the world over, and he was finally afforded the opportunity to show those tuning in what he was capable of. Highlight reel finishes. He had handed Chad his first defeat in unbelievable style and with unbelievable ease. It's something Mendez would be haunted by for years to come in his career, laying in his bed, reliving the moment his dreams were shattered upon the canvas. But his time would come again. Aldo had now defended his title 3 times, something that very few champions have ever achieved. He was looking unstoppable to say the least. Aldo's run through the featherweight division was undeniably dominant. I don't think that there had ever been a single moment where it looked like he was in trouble. Most media outlets at the time could only offer up criticism of his reign by suggesting that it was weight cuts or injuries that would ultimately be his undoing. But the UFC had something else in mind. It wasn't exactly champion versus champion, but it was as close as we were going to get for the time. The UFC announced that Jose would be taking on recently dethroned former lightweight world champion Frankie Edgar, a man that they thought could potentially beat down on Aldo. It is no secret that Edgar had been an underdog his whole career, a guy undersized for his division and always punching above his weight. But what he did not have in stature, he certainly had in heart. None so more obvious than when he dispatched UFC legend BJ Penn to win the lightweight throne, a belt that he would go on to defend 3 times, including Hall of Fame garnering performances against Gray Maynard. He had come undone though at the hands of Benson Henderson twice in a row, and decided that dropping down to featherweight was the best course of action for his career, a weight class that he said he could easily make. I just don't think he was expecting to be instantly taking on the champion in his debut of that weight class. Yet here he was, about to stand across from a man who many were calling the pound-for-pound athlete of the sport.
The judges score this contest 49-46, 49-46, and 48-47 for the winner, and still the undisputed UFC featherweight.
The fight wasn't anything particularly to write home about. Aldo was dominant early, winning clearly the first 3 rounds, but it was Edgar who rallied in the final championship rounds, very characteristic of a man who had made his mark on the sport by way of his grit and resolve. Edgar had arrived at featherweight with a bang, that's for sure, and left lingering desire to see him at the very least get himself a rematch, but he would have to ultimately prove himself again against the top 5. Aldo had proved that those men coming from the heavier weight classes were still no real match for him, and that there needed to be order re-established in the featherweight rankings, and so his next 2 title defenses would come in the form of ranked top 5 opponents, Chan Sung-jun, the man that they called the Korean Zombie, and Ricardo Lamas. Together they presented the best the featherweights could offer at the time, but they fell one and the same. Chan Sung-jun would be knocked out in the 4th round after being outclassed for nigh on 20 minutes, and Ricardo Lamas would be picked apart and destroyed over the course of yet another dominant 25-minute unanimous decision.
Era sonho ser o campeão, então eu consegui. Agora eu tenho que manter isso por muito tempo ainda. Eu quero me dedicar cada dia, cada vez mais, como se fosse o último. Tenho muito ainda a fazer pela categoria, a fazer pelo esporte, a fazer pela minha carreira. Eu quero quebrar muitos recordes ainda que tem a ser quebrado, que eu quero ser campeão e continuar sendo campeão.
This little snippet from a media outlet just really summarized what people thought of him at the time. The 23-1 Aldo has won 13 consecutive Zuffa fights. That puts him just 3 short of Anderson Silva's company record. He's the 3rd longest reigning champion in Zuffa history, behind Silva and George St. Pierre. He's already defeated 4 of the 5 fighters ranked directly underneath him. Bottom line, it's time to start talking about Jose Aldo among the sport's all-time great champions. By the way, that quote was made before beating Ricardo Lamas, meaning it's 14 straight in Zuffa, and all of the top 5 contenders had been beaten by him. He was greatness manifested. He was a sporting icon, the king of Rio, and there was seemingly no end to his reign. Just look at the legend that Chan Sung-jun would become, a man we will talk about later in this video, and here he is, a footnote at the bottom of a legend's reign. After clearing out the division, Aldo had little choice but to take on a man who had been on the warpath to earn his rematch against Aldo. Team Alpha Male standout Chad Mendes, since being destroyed by a knee courtesy of Aldo, would go on a 5-fight win streak, knocking out 4 of his opponents and destroying the other over the course of 3 rounds in a dominant decision. His win streak included some of the best featherweights had to offer, such as Clay Guida and Darren Elkins. It had been 2 long years since Aldo had stripped Mendes of his undefeated record, and the American wanted revenge, and so he was offered a date, October 25th, UFC 179, his chance for redemption. But there were a lot of emotions going into the bout for Chad, and it was bubbling up to the surface.
You know, this is something that's made personal at this point, and you know, it's not about just the title, it's about redemption and payback. You know, this is my time. It's my time to be a king.
If you look back and you include his WEC career, this is his 10th title fight in a row. That's an extraordinary run.
We're talking about one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time.
Amongst the top 2 or 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the world.
Agora eu tenho que manter isso por muito tempo ainda. Eu acho que eu sou cara novo, tenho muito ainda.
You know, he's actually my only loss on my record. All I can say is payback's a bitch.
This is the main event of the evening. From the sold-out Genova. Here we go!
Mendes with the early leg kick.
Nice combination of Mendes again.
That was the first time I've ever been dropped in a fight.
20 seconds on the clock. The Chad still hasn't recovered. Oh, wow, that was way after the buzzer. They go the distance in the rematch here at Rio de Janeiro.
And still, the undisputed UFC featherweight champion of the world, Jose Aldo.
the dust settled and the scorecards were read, Aldo emerged the clear victor. Though all 3 judges gave Aldo 4 out of 5 rounds, the scores do not paint a complete picture. Mendes had put on a performance of a lifetime. Aldo's dominance over the division was pulled into question early. Mendes proclaimed war from the center of the octagon, and that is exactly what unfolded over the next 25 minutes. Ebbs and flows as victory and defeat swelled in both men's resolve. Blood cuts and bruises were shared equally as both men pushed each other to a place that neither had ever been. It was a contest for a lifetime, to say the least. Jose Aldo and Chad Mendes' second clash of violence will be remembered for years to come, a fight placed into the featherweight history books. Whilst the fight gave fans something to adore and cherish for years to come, it in turn took something from these competitors that night. They crossed the threshold of the chain-linked fence, and when they returned, they left a piece of themselves behind, never to be found again, lost to the octagon forever. Whilst I would hate to foreshadow too much on what's yet to come, the fact is, both men would never be the same again. Mendes years later would reflect that the bout had taken years off of his life. Mendes and Aldo collided in what would be the absolute peak of both of their careers. The sheer level of talent, heart and grit displayed that night is a testament to what this sport can produce: greatness in victory and greatness in defeat. But greatness in combat comes with a sacrifice, a fact often ignored in our bloodlust and yearning for violence as fans. We got what we came for though, and Aldo remained the top featherweight in the world once again. His win streak extended to 18. One by one they fell, men seeking to take everything from Jose, men who had equal stories of pain, sacrifice, and self-perceived destined greatness. But their hopes were dashed upon the rocks of a humble man out of the favelas. How strange it is that a man who once dreamed of seeing the ocean for the first time, the salt-dashed shores, and the overwhelming hum of Rio de Janeiro, would eventually be proclaimed the king of it. He had avoided that story we hear too often. Men who become champions, finally reaching the pinnacle of the sport, and then they falter. It's the end of a journey of sorts, lifting that belt of gold and leather above their heads. That fixation on what they perceive as the ultimate goal has nowhere left to go after, and we see time and time again champions spit out the other side of ambition. But Jose was different. As a featherweight, he had never lost. Over 10 years of unrivaled dominance, many championship title wins, already discussed as not only a pound-for-pound great, but as a future Hall of Famer, a rare and exclusive club, reserved only for the most prestigious athletes of combat. And yet, his story was not even close to being over. Asked how he maintained such drive and passion for the sport as those hungry and ambitious men challenging him, those men who had not tasted what Aldo had achieved many times over, he said simply, "I keep dreaming like them." He would later clarify what he was really fighting for, and it wasn't trinkets or accolades. It was something much deeper, much more important: family. He would continue to say, "When you leave your family and friends and everybody behind, and you start to look for something to build your dream, it's really a shot in the dark. We wanted to improve our lives somehow and help our family and our parents, and that's not only my dream, but the dream of everybody else that's in this game." In his naivety, Aldo perceived what he thought was a universal desire pushing all men to achieve greatness, a simple goal to save one's family, but perhaps he missed the shadow lurking beneath, the selfish hunger that drives men. That was a vicious truth that one man soon to come in this story would confront Aldo with. The fact is, it's only a soul raised beneath a zinc roof, with nothing but a soccer ball to call his own, that can channel such desperation into one of the most awe-inspiring runs to the top of this featherweight mountain, a pursuit that saved his family. And yet he still dreams of more. He still feels that hunger that haunted his childhood. It's a circumstance so few will ever truly understand or appreciate. That was Jose's naivety. He thought all those that faced him were pursuing the same ends from the same beginnings, but that simply is not the case. Ego, hopes, dreams, money, fame, faith and love, those ethereal forces that propel men to greatness. Yet inside the octagon, they always dissolve. On the coarse canvas, there is only your opponent. On the logo-ridden mat, under the brightest lights, only truth can be found. For Jose, in that honesty, he would find greatness. And now there was seemingly no end to his reign. Too dominant, too skilled, too driven. But ultimately, all things must come to an end, and I guess, in a way, time steals all. It robs us of the things we covered most. That fixation on what comes next sees years fall by the wayside. What seems like permanence is simply a fleeting illusion. We rage against it, but eventually, one and all capitulate to the universe's will. And so, it was many years ago, halfway the world over, where another dreamer stirred, unaware that his path was already entwined with Aldo's. A preordained clash of violence was yet to come, written in the cosmic web. Just past the foggy crags of Wicklow's mountains lies Dublin City, battered by stormy seas of the North Channel. It's 1988, and a fighter is born.
So what age did you realize that you were good at fighting?
He was born with this like this, and the midwife said to me, the first word was, oh my God, he's going to be a fighter.
I'm Irish, we're all good at fighting. No real great boxers or fighters in my family. We were outlawed. It's into the hills in Scotland, you know, so.
I was just a normal kid growing up and fights would happen. Where I come from and where I grew up, you had to be aware, you had to be able to defend yourself.
I was literally, for the whole of my childhood, the opponent. Like, I would be sitting, minding your own business.
Describe your most memorable bad day as a plumber.
I remember during one lunch break, I was in the car park and it was pissing rain down, and it was just a rough time for me, and I knew that I did not want to pursue this life. I was on them building sites cold and damp, and I was like, that was not me. You know, I knew I could do something better. I knew I had something in me. I just said to myself, there was some music playing, and it was like there wasn't even words to it, it was just a kind of a beat, and I got like I went somewhere with it, and I was like, I'm out of here. I'm gonna just drive out of this building site, head home, and pursue this dream of becoming a world champion in mixed martial arts. So I went from gym to gym, kickboxing, boxing, grappling, wrestling, just ultimately trying to learn different ways the body could move to attack and to defend. I told my father, I said, there's not a hope in hell you're going to ever get me back on that building site again. And he essentially said, we'll see about that. And we had many, many fights where he tried to get me back onto the building site, but...
You know what I mean? I was showing him that I have something here, you know what I mean?
I could not look to my mother and father and say, look at this Irish man, look at his successful fighting career, because there was no one before me, so I was the first one. I had to convince them what I was going to do. But as far as my father was concerned, I was just fighting in a cage and with no career.
We'd be driving home from his gym sessions and listening to the music, and he'd be saying, no, I'm gonna make it, and talk about his dreams, and we just always knew this would come, so it's great to see it come now into real life. So.
After 4 years of participating in the sport, Conor had rarely left the first round, but it wasn't always in his favour. Conor had amassed a record of 10-2, not exactly impressive, falling short twice by way of submission, but his dreams, the very ones that he had professed to his family, were coming closer to reality. In the darkest moments, where his father had literally physically fought him to leave this sport behind in favour of a quote-unquote real job, his girlfriend Dee Devlin had kept his fractured dream together under the guidance of now world-renowned MMA coach John Kavanagh.
What are your first memories from meeting Conor?
Loud, witty, sharp, cocky. But with John, when I went to John, he had a more open mind and he encouraged different movements. And I'd never experienced that before. I'd never heard a coach say that to me before.
Conor had truly found his stride in the sport and become obsessed with every single facet of the game.
It's more like an obsession now. Everything I do is something to do with this, you know?
And we'd always be talking about different fights, and it could be 2 a.m. and he'd message me about a video about two gorillas wrestling.
Jamie, may I ask you to look something up?
And he was amazed by this and sent me the video and was talking about it. See the way they're moving, and what, do you think we could do that? And you know, he's got just a real fascination about how the human body works.
In September of 2012, he had signed with the UK's largest promotion and went on to win his debut in exhilarating fashion, stamping his place to earn a world title shot in the promotion, and Conor would not disappoint. Submitting Dave Hill in the second round, Conor had honestly thought that the UFC would come knocking, but they never did, and his pay was still shocking, just €500 a fight, even with a world title around his waist.
Conor would fight for a world title on Cage Warriors and be paid €500.
Girlfriend's driving around in a beat up Peugeot.
Realistically, you can fight 3 times in the year, so that's €1,500 per year.
It seemed that somehow his father might have been right about this pursuit. But Conor had a plan to entice the UFC. He wanted to become the first ever man to win 2 belts in the promotion. That surely would win over not only his dad, but Dana White as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, live around the world from the Helix here in Dublin, Ireland. This is the moment we've all been waiting for.
It was only when I saw him in Cage Warriors, when his opponent was called out, I just saw this big blockhouse coming out to music and lights, and I looked at this guy and I thought, oh boy, this is my son's opponent. And then they announced Conor, and Conor came out to the music and to the lights, and when he walked down that ramp, I didn't see a boy then. I saw a man, my boy, becoming man. It's not often that a father will admit that, but my son was right, and his father was wrong.
It's now 2 weeks after becoming a simultaneous 2-division world champion in Cage Warriors, and Conor McGregor has quit MMA.
He'd quit a couple of months earlier.
Why's that?
Stuff was going on in his life, and he was like, yeah, I'm just done. I'm doing this 10 years, I'm fighting for €500 3 times a year, you know, what money is that?
Even with a shout out from Joe Rogan, the impressive victory, and the intimidating look of 2 belts upon his shoulders, the UFC was still not interested.
I'd emailed Sean Shelby for the 50th time and I was still getting rejected. And there's only so many times you can ask a girl out and get rejected and keep asking.
But at the bottom of it all, quit and moved on, the call finally came. He was headed to the UFC.
And he actually was one of my trainers, and he wasn't showing up to teach his class. So I'm trying to call him, and he wouldn't answer the phone because he thought I was ringing him to give out to him that he wasn't teaching his class. But eventually he picks up the phone, I'm like, Conor, UFC, 8 weeks, you know. You can imagine what he said.
Yeah. I'm never anywhere, you know, there is no end to this. I'm gonna just keep going. There's no... Success is never final, you know what I mean? You just keep going.
I was in Ireland. I went to the bars down there in Dublin, and everybody was talking to me about Conor McGregor, Conor McGregor, Conor McGregor. I got back and started talking to the matchmakers, and Sean Shelby, one of our matchmakers, had already had his finger on the pulse of Conor McGregor and knew what was going on. So they signed him. Conor came out here. He and I went to dinner.
Damn right, the king of Dublin, the notorious Conor McGregor.
When I left that dinner, I called my partner Lorenzo and I said, listen, this guy can even throw a punch. He's going to be a huge superstar, man.
The brightest prospect to emerge from Ireland in years, Conor McGregor has shown himself to be a top candidate for world title honors in the coming years. And as his UFC debut approaches tonight, anticipation for the fighting pride of Dublin is at a fever pitch.
Ladies and gentlemen, referee Robert Sundell has called a stop to this contest at 1 minute, 7 seconds of the very first round. Declaring the winner by TKO, the Notorious Conor McGregor.
Dana, 60 G's, baby!
The 6-1 UFC sharpened Marcus Brimage had little to offer McGregor, who performed exactly as advertised. He walked forward, completely unfazed by anything Marcus threw down the barrel. By just 60 seconds into the fight, Conor had found his mark, his killer instinct on full display as he timed his punches and looked for the off button that sent Brimage to the canvas. Unable to continue, the fight would end up being shared all over the internet, and even back then, before White could be memed to death over his infatuation with McGregor, he was already being characterized as a fangirl in the post-fight press conference. Media outlets were commenting how the UFC president was gushing and giddy over McGregor, which is actually quite funny when you go back and read these articles. McGregor was at home under the bright lights, and it was in his post-fight interview that we could see for the first time on the main stage the real natural showmanship that McGregor had entwined into his DNA. Microphone in hand, he would proclaim the now famous Dana 60 G's baby. Anyone at the time watching was immediately sold. The man was calm, cool, collected, devastatingly precise with his knockouts, which kept stacking up. And the icing on the cake, he wasn't trying to pretend to be anything he wasn't. He was just a showman.
This is only the beginning for me. I'm not stopping. I'm going to take over. And like even in the all the week, I felt like the start of this thing. I said I was going to steal the show, and I feel like I'm stealing the show. I feel like I've stole the show, stole everything.
He wanted to be the best. He wanted money. He wanted to be famous. And people fucking loved it.
People are going crazy on Twitter, man.
Yeah.
People are going fucking crazy.
You know,
Ireland's going nuts. We got a big fight coming in Boston.
Yeah, sweet.
So it'd be fucking cool to bring you to Boston, too.
McGregor's next opponent was scheduled to be Andy Ogle at UFC Fight Night 26, held in Boston, Massachusetts, buying into the deep Irish heritage that the city is more than well known for. However, Ogle's withdrawal due to injury led to young contender Max Holloway stepping in on short notice. As we know, when it comes to the featherweights, Max is more important to this story than you can ever know. At this point in the story though, he was a 21-year-old Hawaiian fighter at the time, with a more established UFC presence than Brimage, someone for Conor to perhaps build his name off of. Having debuted in 2012, he had a pretty good run in the promotion so far, losing his debut, but going on to put 3 straight wins together, but unfortunately coming up short in his last fight. This loss, however, was a controversial split decision to Dennis Bermudez at UFC 160, where 11 out of 11 media members scored the fight in Holloway's favour, just showing how fickle judges are in this sport. Even back then, Holloway was known for his durability and striking, and insane cardio. It was a great test for Conor, and there were certainly high expectations for him to perform.
This contest, I mean, is there any part of you that's kind of starting to get a little annoyed with this and feel like maybe you're being overlooked?
You know, not at all. You know, it is what it is. He got hype, man, and I just can't wait to Saturday night. We get to mix it up.
Kenny Florian loves him. Dana White loves him. The fans love him. And he's won me over too. I've seen his interviews. He seems like a real guy. He seems like an honest, straight talker.
2 things I really like to do, and that's whoop ass and look good, and I'm doing one of them right now. On Saturday night, I'm gonna do the other. It's only the beginning. You know what I mean? That's what I think. This is only the beginning. I'm here to take over. I'm not here to shake no one's hand, or I'm not here to be the token Irish guy in there. I'm in there to get in and win. I believe the fighting Irish spirit. We fight till the end. We are in it until it is done. Showing the UFC and the world of MMA a martial artist that they haven't seen before. You know. Hank is him thinking about fucking shades, camera crew, a 3-strong camera crew. It's a bit much maybe, but fuck it.
146 for Mr. McGregor!
God, he really looked scary up there, didn't he? Like, he looked vicious.
Max is one of the few guys I think we've had on that's fought Conor.
He took me down, I was on, and then I had him in half guard, and he was passing, and I had like his ankle. And right when he didn't pass, I like hit, and he screamed, he went, ah! Like a hurtful scream. I'm on the bottom holding him, I was like, oh, you okay? He's like, yeah, keep fighting, mate, keep fighting.
No, he didn't!
Declaring the winner by unanimous decision, the Notorious Conor McGregor!
McGregor, who despite being on the preliminary card, received a full-on lights-out walkout treatment, with the Boston crowd erupting as he entered, draped in an Irish flag. This moment underscored his popularity and the UFC's targeted promotion of him. Needless to say, his charisma and the fighting heart he had to back it up had already swindled the MMA fanbase. Conor would go on to win a gutsy, yet dominant decision against Holloway. Not exactly the brutal knockout that he had predicted against the young Hawaiian, but it was still enough to have the crowd screaming in his success. It was, however, a bittersweet moment for McGregor. Victory in the Irish-proud Boston arena was incredible, but an MRI scan post-fight revealed a devastating ACL injury, requiring surgery and time away from the sport, something that would keep him out of action for eventually 10 months.
I kind of bring it back as if I'm going to go across that way. Look at the way it's going that way.
You would have thought that this may have derailed some of that momentum that he had built up in his short rise, but well, it kind of just did the exact opposite. His return would ultimately end up becoming his grandest stage to date. In only his third fight in the UFC, it was announced that not only would McGregor be in the main event of a fight night, but it would also take place in Dublin. It was initially scheduled to be against Cole Miller, but after an injury a month before the fight, Diego Brandao stepped in on somewhat short notice, and he was now in the Lion's Den. A McGregor main event in Ireland was everything a fan of the UFC could ask for. The question was, could he put on a show?
It's been almost a year since the notorious Conor McGregor last entered the octagon. His rehabilitation has come through hard work and dedication with the SBG team in Dublin with coach John Kavanagh.
So this is his first fight from the ACL. I asked him yesterday, is it full combat? He said, yeah, 100%. I'm supremely confident. He is supremely confident.
I've lost my mind doing this game, yeah. Like Vincent van Gogh. He dedicated his life to his art and lost his mind in the process. That's happened to me. This is the life we chose. I would have loved to catch that. That is why I'm willing to kill every single man in my path to get that belt, you know what I mean? To secure the future, from my family's future, you know what I mean? That's what I'm doing it for. When my mother has a big mansion, and my kids have everything they ever want, then it will pay. I'm set to take over this game pretty soon. I don't sleep. I wait. I'll sleep when the division is wiped out.
Can this kid break into the top 10? Can he break into the top 5? And can he challenge for a world title?
Saturday night, you're gonna see a true #1 contender here on Saturday night.
Fighting out of the red corner. This man is a freestyle fighter. He holds a professional record of 14 wins and 2 losses. He stands 5'11" inches tall and weighing in at 146 pounds. Fighting out of Dublin, Ireland, the Notorious Conor McGregor.
This could be it. That is it. It is all. Conor McGregor. I said it last year. We're not here just to take part. We're here to take over.
He wasn't here to take part, he was here to take over. A quote that would enter the zeitgeist of popular culture. It was painted on street walls, and it was printed on every poster that Conor signed. It's so hard to express what he was doing during this time. It was defining the sport in its own way, paving a path that had never been walked before. His headlining performance against Brandao opened the floodgates for a huge amount of fans pining to see the rise of a potential superstar. It really did grab a hold of many people's attention on the periphery of the sport. It wasn't the levels that Conor would be known for in the future, but at the time, the UFC hadn't really experienced this level of frenzy, and it was all particularly coming from one country. Ireland had put Conor on the map, and his nation was desperate to see him succeed. Conor really did have the whole country behind him, and that night in Dublin truly showed that. UFC President Dana White made his next move known. It was time to put the Irishman under the brightest lights, the city of sin, Las Vegas, the home of combat as it were, and McGregor knew exactly who he wanted to be standing across from, the man from Louisiana himself, Dustin the Diamond Poirier, a man McGregor knew as Cole Miller's teammate. When Cole Miller had pulled out of his fight, Conor had thought that Dustin had actively avoided fighting him because he would have been fully aware of Miller's injury before the UFC, and yet made no plans to step in on short notice against McGregor in Ireland, leaving McGregor to draw only one simple conclusion. Dustin was scared, shaking in his boots even. It was an easy target for Conor, a man in the top 5 of the featherweight division, and a man he thought that couldn't stomach to face him, and there was no longer anywhere for the American to hide. What followed would go down in history as one of the UFC's best pre-fight build-ups the organization had ever seen, and one that would see McGregor be compared to Muhammad Ali as one of the best wordsmiths and trash talkers the combat sports world had known. The mind games were about to begin.
If you listen really closely, you can hear every featherweight in the division cry, oh, why is he getting the quick turnaround? Why is he on this the biggest card of the year? You know, I love it, I lap it up. I rub it in their faces.
Kept talking more and more hype and more hype. And I saw an opportunity here, get a lot of light on the featherweight division and get to shut this guy's mouth. This is my house. You know what I mean? I've built where I'm at from the ground up.
Whip Conor's silly ass and then have some fish and chips and Guinness, you know.
dedicate this fight to Ireland.
You ain't shit, boy. You ain't shit. Yeah, you ain't shit. What's up? Good. What's up?
Dustin thinks it's all talk, but when he wakes up with his nose plastered on the other side of his face, he's gonna know it's not all talk.
It's the first time I've ever fought somebody talking like this. It is, it's personal.
So I will go out and I'll put him stiff. Make no mistake, he's afraid. He's a scared little boy. He's a quiet little hillbilly from the back arse of nowhere.
I'm a nice guy now. What?
I've never disliked somebody that much that I'm ever playing.
I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Ali, Conor, both level when it comes to mental warfare.
It's the art of war, man. I mean,
yeah.
Fighting is as much mental as it is physical.
I sit back, smile, go in and put him away in one round, and we will talk again on Saturday night.
Prepared and ready, and I'm gonna put this guy away.
Conor McGregor is a combination of all the lessons that everyone has ever learned through self-promotion and through positive thinking and belief in oneself.
Everybody's talking about this fight. We're gonna go out there and steal the show.
This fight is 3 rounds in the UFC Featherweight Division. Introducing first, fighting out of Dublin, Ireland, the Notorious Conor!
This is the new age. I wanted to come over here to America and show the American public the new era of the fighting Irish, and I brought my whole country with me. If one of us goes to war, we all go to war. So I said I'd knock him out in the first round, and I knocked him out in the first round. You can call me Mystic Mac because I predict these things.
Dustin Poirier would fall, as all those in the UFC who had stood in front of Conor had, riled up and pushed to the limit mentally by everything that Conor had said during the build-up. Dustin had wilted before he had even placed a foot on the canvas of the octagon.
The first time I fought Conor, I felt like that. When the bell rang, I was like a deer in the headlights. It's happening. Here we go. All this, all that talk and everything over the months just sat in my head.
Yeah.
And I just read into it too much.
The fight, a mere formality, as he was dismantled inside 2 minutes of the bout. His head, as Mystic Mac had predicted, bounced off of the canvas. If you want to point to one fight in particular where McGregor seeped into the real mainstream outside of the sport, it is this one. Compilations, highlight reels, memes, they all spewed forth from the outcome of this fight. His way of tearing down Dustin's psychology, predicting the fight with eerie accuracy, and then pulling it off in entertaining fashion was a recipe for otherworldly success. Dana White, more than likely rubbing his hands together, the Irishman had pulled off his greatest victory to date. Dustin, as the official victory was announced, looked distraught, devastated, his whole world crumbling in, so close to a title shot once more, yet he stumbled at the final hurdle. But he didn't know what lay in wait for him. Little did he know that whilst an entire country stood mouth agape at the ascension of Conor McGregor, it is him, humbled by defeat, that would go down eventually as one of the sport's most cherished and beloved combatants. But his journey in this featherweight saga ends here, a story to be told at another time and another weight class, because for now, 145 pounds was finished for Dustin. He would never fight at featherweight again. Just 2 months later, the day before Jose Aldo and Chad Mendes graced the octagon with one of the best fights the featherweight division had ever seen, it was announced that Conor would face Dennis Siver in the main event of a card taking place at the start of the new year. Whilst rumours circulated that he was expected to face the winner of Aldo and Mendes, it was pretty clear that the UFC wanted to suck as much blood from McGregor as possible. White would later clarify that if McGregor was able to defend his number 5 ranking against Siver, who was ranked 10th in the world at the time, he would stamp his shot at the title. So this was it. This was everything the Irishman had been working toward. Just one more fight, one more win, and he had a chance at what he thought was his, that featherweight title.
At 145 pounds, fighting out of Dublin, Ireland, the Notorious Conor McGregor!
He's one of them, keep saying all talk. It's not all talk here. I'm gonna wipe out everyone in this division. I said that, and I will do it.
You will be fighting him next for the title.
I'm gonna hand him my spit bucket. Tell him to go back and spit shine that belt and bring it back here. They're ready for me to take it.
As promised, the Irishman would be granted his shot at the title. McGregor's rise in the sport was unprecedented at this point, and so the UFC would spare no expense in trying to push their superstar further into stardom. They were all in pushing the Irishman, and what would follow would be a world tour for the ages. The UFC would announce that Conor would face Jose Aldo at UFC 189, and over the course of the next 12 days, they would fly to 5 countries and 8 different cities to promote the fight, with Dana White admitting that it was the most amount of money that they had ever spent in advertising. And well, it was money well spent, because what would follow was one of the most entertaining press tours the world of MMA had ever seen.
Disrespected you that got you to dislike him.
This is not a therapy session.
Well, no, but you are.
I heard a slap him in the back of the head. I didn't slap him in the back of the head. I put my hand on his neck and I bent him over.
Yo, dream.
You like it?
Yeah, dream.
It looks good, right?
No, never.
Say goodbye. Tell him I said I am his daddy.
Nunca vai ser.
Sit on my lap.
Nunca vai ser.
We want to know what Jose's pussy smells like. Jose, are you listening? Jose, keep that man listening. McGregor's coming for you. He'll do you too. Jose McGregor.
Past the glimmering lights, the screaming crowds, the camera lenses of this press tour, the men were now locked into their respective training room doors. A grueling camp would follow, months of training, with one goal in mind, victory. And it was never so important. Quite literally, more eyes than there had ever been in the sport were tuning in to watch this event. That pressure must have been unimaginable for both men. Jose had more to lose though, and it was wrought on his face the entire press tour. It was getting to him. It was so clear that the UFC wanted Jose to fall under the treads of McGregor. 2 weeks before the bout was expected to take place, Aldo would pull out of the main event citing a rib fracture as a result of a training incident. Rather famously, McGregor would find out early in the morning.
Fucking hell.
And his reaction would be hailed by Dana White for years to come. The opponent, in which McGregor didn't care who it was, would end up being none other than Chad Mendes, who, after losing to Aldo the year previously in the fight of the year, or even decade, had gone on to knock out top contender Ricardo Lamas, cementing his place in the top 5 of the division. His return to the title wasn't exactly picture perfect. 2 weeks' notice, probably sitting on the sidelines eating elk and drinking beers. It isn't the greatest of circumstances, but it wasn't as if Chad spent his off-season being fat and useless. And so if any man could step in on short notice for an interim title and put on a gutsy performance of a lifetime, it was Chad. And so that was it, the world title face-off between Aldo and McGregor that the UFC had put so much effort into promoting had fallen by the wayside, but people were still fixated by what was to come. The event still broke Nevada's gate record, producing over 7.2 million in ticket sales despite the opponent change, and the pay-per-view, whilst not what every fan wanted to see, still sold almost 1 million streams. McGregor waltzed into fight week, taking in the empire that he had built. This week was all about him.
Chad Mendes now will fight Conor McGregor for the interim belt.
Jose Aldo backed out. He was going to fight you, backed out. He's been cleared to fight by a doctor. What do you think happened?
Me, I feel he is afraid. The doctors have cleared him to fight. It's a bruise, but the man is running scared. I cannot force him into the octagon to face me. So rightfully so, the belt should be taken from him, and we should contest for the interim belt.
Conor's ready to go. The #1 guy in the world, Chad Mendes, is ready to go.
My mind is absolutely bulletproof, solid as a rock. So if you are #1, who gives a shit if #2 steps out in place of #3? At the end of the day, I'm #1. Yeah, his facial structure will be rearranged after the fight.
I match up horrible for this guy. Conor, do you know what wrestling is?
I can rest my balls on your forehead. I'm gonna kick you straight in the throat. I'm gonna kick you straight in the throat.
Alright, dude, you're so tough.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, for the UFC interim featherweight title. Introducing the Notorious one, Conor McGregor.
His belly is gonna be breathing in, and his body is gonna be screaming for oxygen, and I'm gonna be still there in his face, cracking him with everything I have, every shot, the heel, the knee.
Look at the clock closely. 10 seconds. Could he finish him here? It's all over.
In just over 7 years, McGregor had gone from a man struggling to make ends meet, on welfare, questioning whether he should even be competing in the sport in the first place, to now not only becoming one of the world's biggest superstars, but also an interim world champion, the gold and leather wrapped gloriously around his waist, all the while hoisting the green, white and orange of the Irish flag into the air. Tears were shared with his family, the disbelief. The mountain surely climbed, a crowning moment for ages to come, but it never came easy. McGregor started the fight with his trademark left hand and kicks swinging at their mark, but he quickly found himself on his back getting smashed by Mendes, who took him down with ease. Perhaps the first real danger that we had ever seen him in the UFC. Mendes wasn't idle there either, dangerously close to submissions being sunk in and punishing elbows that slit McGregor open. Conor, though, was unfazed, laughing, mocking his opponent, talking trash as elbow after elbow came down upon his face. In the second round, Mendes had clearly slowed, the lack of training camp perhaps catching up with him. In McGregor's resilience, he scrambled to his feet, and it didn't take him long to smell blood in the water. He punished Mendes with a kick to the guts that winded him, and the next, he was laid out on the canvas. McGregor proclaimed the interim featherweight champion of the world. Critics may have claimed that it was the worst Conor had looked, and that there was certainly chinks in the armour, but it was drowned out by the frenzy of not only Irish fans that had made up 20% of the attendance of the arena that night, but also pretty much every human slightly interested in MMA at the time. Everyone loved McGregor, and that was pretty uncharacteristic of this most sludgy of fan bases. There was barely a hater in sight. The sport was unified under Conor's reign. That night was his, and he proved that he not only had the skill, but he also had the heart too, put to the test, and he still passed. The fight with Aldo was quickly rebooked. It needed to be capitalized on, considering all the prior promotion that had been done, and well, now it was even more exciting. McGregor was the interim champion and had just wrapped filming on one of the most successful seasons of The Ultimate Fighter in recent memory. People were excited to say the least. The fight was booked for the end of 2015, UFC 194, McGregor versus Aldo. The year was about to be closed off with a bang.
There's another thing. What do you want to be? You know, I don't want to be anything. I am what I am everything I want to be. And I'm already there. You know? I don't want anything. You know? They're always gonna want. I always have the attitude that I have. And I always felt like I was a black belt walking in. You know what I mean? I always felt like I was the world champion. I always felt like I already could do everything.
UFC fans watching around the world have been waiting for. Live from the sold-out MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas.
Here we go! Green trunks for the southpaw, the notorious Conor McGregor. Black trunks for the champion, smiling. Oh! Just like the new UFC Featherweight Champion of the world! Oh, unbelievable! Undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion of the world!
In some mockery of reality, Conor McGregor, just moments before one of the most shocking championship performances in the sport, would practice the very shot that ended the fight in 13 seconds, visualizing his intentions and then materializing them. But what makes it just that little more eerie is the fact that he had read the signs in the build-up to the fight also.
I knew he would overextend, and I knew I'd catch him. So, Mystic Mac strikes again.
A tale that would unfold a finish. McGregor, over the course of a year, had worn Jose down, verbally insulting and humiliating him at every opportunity. That surely would have weighed heavy on the champion, wearing down his spirit. Jose had sat proudly on the featherweight throne for half a decade, his reign one of the most respected in the sport, and his legitimacy never questioned. Well, that was until an Irishman came out of the shadows to spoil his domination. McGregor had proclaimed that he would end it in one, and rightly left with the fastest finish in championship history, a record that stands to this day. His words painted a tapestry of futures yet to be seen, in rich and enigmatic detail. Mystic Mac was an artist of manifestation, and the octagon was his canvas. From his shot calling that would predict the inevitable destruction of Dustin Poirier's P-head to the mental ruination of Aldo, McGregor had proved time and time again he could see things that others could not, futures yet to come. His journey from Dublin to the pinnacle of MMA was achieved by this otherworldly self-belief. Each fight was simply him sowing his seed of destiny. The crowd at UFC 194 witnessed not just a knockout, but a moment where faith in oneself, one's abilities, one's skills had truly transcended into the physical. The climax of one of the most entertaining, viral, and destructive ascensions had crescendoed, and now for the first time in the history of the UFC, the undisputed featherweight belt had changed hands. Unsurprisingly, it was the most popular moment the sport had ever known at that point. Conor had catapulted the UFC's popularity into the stratosphere with otherworldly effect. For all intents and purposes, this era of the organization was the McGregor era. His name was on the tips of everyone's tongue. Fans brought to the arena that hosts the octagon, lured there by the rumblings and faint whispers of a charismatic Irishman, his soundbites viral.
Break out the red panties. Who the fuck is that guy? I'm your father. I'm your daddy, yeah? Call me Jose Senior. You look like a 50-year-old retired skateboarder.
And his KOs awe-inspiring. New fans didn't care about the rules, the rankings, the belts, the history. They just wanted to see an Irishman conduct greatness on the main stage. And for a time, that's exactly what they got. But often the highest highs are matched equally with the lowest lows. It's 3 months later, March 2016, and Conor McGregor is being choked out by journeyman Nate Diaz. The circumstances of him ending up in this most precarious of positions will be explored in the lightweight history video soon to come. It's now 3 months later again, July 2016. It's the biggest UFC card of the decade, UFC 200. Conor McGregor watches through the chain-linked fence as an interim featherweight title is on the line. Jose Aldo faces Hall of Famer Frankie Edgar in their second matchup together. The historical yellow canvas plays host to the political UFC machine that is churning out interim titles to sell pay-per-views. Jose is offered another chance to wrap a belt, illegitimate or not, around his waist. The King of Rio would go on to beat Frankie Edgar for the second time by unanimous decision, and Conor McGregor, despite lurking behind the fence, staring down the history of his division playing out, would never fight at featherweight again. His story winds down a bitter, turbulent path. His story was one that millions once watched with awe, a rise so celebrated, so almost sanctified, that it transcended the sport and burned itself into the zeitgeist. The UFC was no longer an abstract entity hovering above its fighters. It became synonymous with Conor McGregor. This isn't hyperbole or a convenient twist of facts to fit a narrative. It's the truth of an era defined by the Irishman. But if money and fame do anything, they act as a merciless mirror, reflecting what truly lurks beneath the surface. They take the good, the ambition, the charisma, the grit, and twist it into something gnarled, amplifying the ugliness that festers just beneath the fragile veneer of our better selves. Wealth and notoriety hollow out that spirit, turning dreams into burdens, victories into curses. For every soul lifted by fame's spotlight, countless others are cursed beneath its weight, their flaws magnified until they're unrecognizable, even to themselves. McGregor was once a beacon of this sport's life-changing potential, but his legacy became twisted with more sinister affairs. A man whose brilliance was slowly suffocated by the very rewards he chased.
What has martial arts done for you? Martial arts has given me a focus. I don't know where I would be without martial arts in my life, anytime I've drifted away from training, or I don't know, I just seem to lose focus. But when I'm on and martial arts is my life, it just gives me dedication. You know what I mean? It gives me a drive, something that nothing else could do for me.
A civil jury in Ireland finds that mixed martial arts fighter Conor McGregor sexually assaulted a woman in a hotel penthouse during a night of heavy partying.
What gambling are you trying to talk about? There was no gambling. The only thing that happens when me and Dana gets together is damn good business, and that is it. Like I said the last time, partying is weakness for the soul. I don't want anything. I have everything. That's a mindset of me. I have everything. I have everything. You know what I mean?
If it weren't for Conor McGregor, there would be no mixed martial academic, no lens through which we dissect this saga. But now, it pains me to say, everything he accomplished spoiled like untouched carrion on the roadside. That pursuit of greatness that once fueled him grew a parasite. The money, the fame. I don't look back on his reign with glee anymore. Instead, I mourn for what was and for what could have been. Motivated McGregor inspired so many people. Proper 12 McGregor is well just a meme. Call me dramatic all you like, but the man had changed my life, introduced me to something that had given me some of the most memorable moments of my life. Without him, I'd never have witnessed Jorge's 5-second knee, El Cucui's terrifying lightweight run, and Dominic Cruz's inspiring bantamweight saga. And now, that man spits in people's faces, punches old men, and has succumbed to something altogether evil. I don't know him personally, and I don't want to judge him too much, but I see what I see, parasocial or not, and it's just sad. His story will be continued another time and in another video. After McGregor became a double champ, he would find himself quickly being stripped of his featherweight title. Jose Aldo would be promoted to the undisputed champion of the world, but this story of the King of Rio, this story of the Notorious one, had come to an end of sorts. Because as is destined to always happen, there was another who sought to take everything away from Jose, a man determined to create his own legacy. As did Jose's story start in fire, so did Holloway's. A brutal dance of fire and water takes place deep underneath the North Pacific Sea. Beneath the waves, the ocean forges a new land from molten ooze that creeps out between the continental shelf. An archipelago of 137 islands is formed in natural beauty. 8 stand out from the rest, large land masses, and from it, tropical trees grow. A dense foliage, beautiful golden sand is strewn across the glimmering coastlines, and mountains cut the skyline, and deep below, molten magma threatens to explode. Millions of years pass, and now double-hulled canoes, handcrafted by seafaring Polynesians, traverse treacherous waves in pursuit of unclaimed shores. They find those islands formed eons ago, a fertile land now, and a new place to call home. It becomes known as Hawaii in the ancient tongue of Maori. Families grow, tribes rise and fall, and from the ashes of infighting, dynasties take rule. The land changes little, but the people do. Manifest destiny reaches the shores of these islands, and those men who did not belong take it all. It's a story told too many times, and in too many different lands. The first settlers, the peaceful ones, have everything taken from them. Their story corrupted, altered, fragmented, replaced with a new way of thinking and a new way of living, the manifestation of which is a broken people, their purpose lost to Western domination. It's not political, it's just human nature. Drugs take a grip over the poorest and most displaced of all of them, and that is where Max's story begins.
So when did you find out that she was using drugs?
Pulled this thing off the shelf and freaking hits the ground. And
on the ground, it fell as a pipe, and I was 5th grade. I was like, holy shit. And I'm learning about this right now. Like, what is going on?
My mom and my dad, I knew there was heavy drug users, and then my dad would always beat up my mom. I think so that her drugs was like her medicine, like would calm her stress. But
a week gone, come back, and I always think during those days, like, is she alive?
Our lives, she put our lives in front of hers and give us to our grandma.
I know, like, your dad wasn't around too much.
Yeah.
Your mom, your grandparents kind of raised you, right?
Yeah. The last time I saw my dad was when I was like 10, 11 years old, and then I never see him after that.
I really didn't have both of them, I didn't have a dad at all.
I should pray for him, but like, he has no use in my life anymore. She didn't give up on us, so like, that pushed me more not to give up anything.
That one thing called ice, man. That thing was that drug is a hell of a drug, man.
On the Big Island, one person dies every 11 days from a drug overdose.
I saw a bunch of people go down that road.
And a growing number of victims are teenagers.
When you get faced with a certain situation, you can always go left or go right, you know? And I always just so happened to always pick the right path. And with drugs too, I was like, this ain't gonna stop me, you know? Like, I ain't gonna let this be it, you know? This ain't it for me.
Max had been born into a life ravaged by the impact of drugs, not only on his family, but the society around him. He had found comfort in sports at a young age, but then the siren song of combat lured him to the mats to find controlled violence. But his warrior's heart would be put to the test within days of throwing his first punch on the practice room floor.
I trained for 3 days, and then the coach told us, Max, someone dropped out. You wanna fight? On Saturday? You gotta weigh 135. I was like,
I play for wine. I like trying to show people that you're not a bad kid. Like,
that's the reason why he's good, is because he pushed beyond the pain, beyond what anybody said. Just never give up.
That kind of focus is what led Max to a victory in his first fight after only 3 days of training.
People was doubting me, all my cousin them, they was telling me I couldn't do this, do that, I'm not ready.
Now there are many ways to learn to fight, some traditional, some not so much, like that guy playing touch putt in the park, each clearly working on some kind of fundamentals, whether it be movement, strength, precision, power, etc. Then there is, well, there's Max.
You wanna know what I did?
Yeah.
You know the UFC game? I would use Renan Barao and Jose Aldo, and I would do stuff with them. I'd be like, oh yeah, this works in the game. So my friend at the time, Dustin Kimura, he would kind of hold mitts for me, and I would be like, look, I tried this in the game and it was working, let's try it. And we did it. I figured it out from freaking UFC.
In the blue corner, Max Holloway.
Stand up war. Bryce Kamaki, a real tough guy. He came out swinging. You can see my eye, but he caught me in some good stuff. I caught him in good stuff.
After only 2 years in the sport, and after proving everyone wrong in Honolulu, Max felt like he was destined for so much more, but there was something far more important that was about to rock his life. On January 4th, 2012, Max and his partner would bring Rush Holloway into the world, his firstborn son. Becoming a father at the age of 20 was one of the best days of his entire life, something that any fan of Holloway can attest to. We have seen Rush grow over the years cage-side, but January 4th was about to become even more meaningful.
January 4th, I was at the hospital. I was waiting on the arrival of my son. I remember exact times, 10:03 a.m. I get my phone rang and be like, hey, check your email. So I go check my email. It's a UFC contract to fight Poirier for February 4th.
Wow. Holloway had been given the green light by the UFC to replace Ricardo Lamas, who had been injured himself in his upcoming bout with Dustin Poirier, a 12-1 featherweight on the rise, who had 3 UFC wins under his belt and had gone 1-1 in the WEC. It was a tall order for the rather inexperienced Max, a man who, at the time of signing, was the youngest athlete on the entire UFC roster. But if anyone felt like he could upset the crowd and destroy the favorite, it was the overconfident Holloway as ever.
And we're here with Max Holloway, who's gearing up for his UFC debut.
One of my cousins, I made a deal with him. I bet him $1,000 that I would make it to the UFC.
Max, talk a little bit about when you first found out that you were going to be fighting in the UFC. What went through your mind?
Best day of my life. I couldn't believe it. Like, these guys got to see me grow up, you know. I got in the UFC when I was 20.
20 years old.
And a lot of people think I'm DC's old ass. Like 42 years old or something.
Because you're 20 years old. You're the youngest fighter in the UFC. Talk a little bit about your opponent that you're going to be facing. I believe ranked number 5 in the world.
We're here with Dustin the Diamond Poirier. What's going on, man?
Not too much, man. Just getting ready to take off.
2 opponents that backed out. Were they like in the same week or
maybe
2 weeks apart or something like that?
2 weeks apart.
Yeah, okay.
I'm a fighter at the end of the day, so we're gonna get in there fight no matter who it is.
I remember when I fought Dustin Poirier, the first fight, my UFC event, you know, my first ever UFC event. When Bruce was introducing me, like saying my name, like my knees was weak. I was like, holy fuck. I was like, bro, you can't be fainting, Max. You're on fucking TV, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, what the hell?
I kept telling myself, don't faint, you know? Somebody asked who's my favorite fight. What is my favorite fight ever in the UFC? It gotta be this one. This is my first one. I learned a lot.
Feet, I got taken down and he like triangle armbarred me from the top, which is crazy. Like he triangle armbarred me from the top, so.
After landing some decent shots in the opening minute and a half, his jab most of all landing reliable, Dustin, the jiu-jitsu black belt, would tear Holloway to the ground, and from there, it wasn't even close. Poirier would scramble from position to position, ultimately ending up in a fight-ending triangle armbar. Within just 5 fights, Max had already fought in the UFC, and although he exited the octagon with the first loss on his record, he would still have accomplished the dream of many fighters the world over. He was young, he had that fire burning deep inside of him, and well, he still had a UFC contract. Max would fight 3 more times in 2012, becoming one of the most active athletes on the roster that year, probably because they were paying him a measly $6K to show, $6K to win. This time around though, Max would put on an impressive win streak, 2 decision victories and 1 TKO. Max was setting himself up toward becoming a ranked man in the featherweight division, his skills along the way improving month over month. Not that man who was learning fight moves from a video game, but 2013 would serve to put an end to that trajectory. First, Max would come up against Dennis Bermudez, a man who had come up short in the final of The Ultimate Fighter, but had since accumulated a 3-fight win streak. Just like Holloway, they were destined to meet in the center of the octagon to determine who would be walking away extending that win streak. Unfortunately, the 14-fight vet Bermudez proved to be the wall that Holloway could not overcome, handing Max his second loss inside the Premier organization, and it wasn't about to get any better. As we had talked about earlier in this video, Max would find himself standing across from future UFC featherweight champion Conor McGregor on his meteoric rise to stardom. Max, unfortunately, the byproduct of fate-fulfilling manifestations. It was certainly a tough year for the Hawaiian, staring down the barrel of a 3-3 record in the UFC. If we didn't know what we know today, we would more than likely be saying this was a journeyman in the making, a nobody destined for the prelims, a man 1 more loss away from being cut from the organization entirely. Max, however, had other plans. He was about to start what was going to be one of the most historic win streaks the sporting world of MMA would ever know, and it started at the turn of the new year in 2014.
You shouldn't even give up. Like, what is that? Like that, if you give up, you certified a loser. If you try, you at least win in your book.
He's fascinating to me, Max, because he's just this guy that, like, I knew he was really good, and then he kept getting better and kept getting better. I'm like, where's the ceiling on this guy? Like, you really don't know how good a guy is. Like, you see them in a fight and you go, wow, he's really good. But then you don't see him for a while and you're like, is he better? Has he slipped? Is he training hard? Like, where is he at? Like, you don't know until you see him again.
You see a Max Holloway 2.0, you know, fought 8 times in the last 2 years, you know, 4 fights each year.
His cardio is incredible.
Through the roof, you know. Excellent footwork combinations, cuts angles well, reads the fight. That's the main thing, you know what I mean? He reads the fight, so yeah.
He reads the fight, and he's so good at implementing that strategy of, like, consistent pressure, constant angles, switching stances, and he switches stances flawlessly.
The end goal is to be a legend, to be remembered as one of the greatest, and to have a gold belt.
Over the next 2 years, Max would put on one of the most impressive set of wins the featherweight division had ever seen. In 2014, he would take out Will Chope, Andre Fili, Clay Collard, and Akira Kurosane, finishing 3 of them by way of knockout and putting Andre Fili in a beautiful guillotine choke. Max wasn't messing around anymore. He wanted finishes, and he wanted performances of the night, and there wasn't much getting in his way. 4 fights in 4 years is a tall order for any athlete, but Max was about to double it up. 2015 would see 4 more fights, 2 that were finishes and 2 decisions. Max ending 2015 ranked number 4 in the entire world after beating longtime UFC vet Jeremy Stevens. I guess the most impressive thing about these 2 years and his UFC career in general up until that point is just how great his wins and even losses had grown with time. No better example of this is his finish over Charles Oliveira. Whilst it was a strange injury that saw the Brazilian carted out on a stretcher, Max up until that point was absolutely piecing him up, and considering where Charles has gone since in his career, and even people like Jeremy Stevens and Andre Fili, enough good things can't be said about this 8-fight win streak that had now seen him touted as one of the best featherweights in the entire world. The division was under a grey cloud though. Conor at this point was running his extracurricular activities, battling it out to little success with journeyman Nate Diaz and trying his hardest to get himself double championship status, leaving the featherweight throne uncontested. And on the horizon, Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar had already been placed in an interim title matchup, leaving all the rest of the men in the top 5, who themselves had more than likely already earned their own deserving shot at the title, to continue to scrap it out. And so Max, looking for another paycheck, and knowing that there was not a chance to place gold around his waist in the short term, would look to extend his win streak to 9 by taking on former title challenger Ricardo Lamas in the main card of UFC 199.
Winner in 8 straight fights dating back to 2014, Waianae native Max Holloway just a few weeks away from the biggest fight of his career. 24-year-old will square off with number 5 Ricardo Lamas on the main card of UFC 199 in Los Angeles 3 Saturdays from now.
Feeling great, can't wait to get this weight off, and then I get to eat, and then favorite part of the whole fight week is punch someone in the face. It's gonna be fun, I think so. You guys are gonna see an entertaining, action-packed fight, and I can't wait to go out there and deliver.
Another win over Max would put me right back up there, so I stay patient and I go fight by fight.
Holloway's dictating where this fight takes place, and he's teeing off body shots. Looking to finish this early, big trouble, and Holloway's all over him, swarming the bully.
Amazing fight against Ricardo Lamas. You're piecing him up, and then you're famous for, you doing this.
Yeah, pointing down. He does a gesture like, come to me, like, I want to fight. I was like, okay, say no more, brother. And we just throw it out, you know what I mean? I didn't care. I was like,
wow, it looks like they're going to swing to the very end. And he wasn't kidding. Wow. It's very rare.
Unanimous decision. Max Blast
The two men placed in the top echelon of the division would put on a masterclass of striking. Well, at the expense of Lamas' face and body, that is. Max, over the course of 3 brutal rounds, would dismantle the American shot by shot, in total landing over 100 shots of his 200 throws, a complete tsunami of physical abuse that wilted Lamas to the final buzzer. But that fight perhaps won't be remembered just so much for the masterclass it was, as it will for the final 10 seconds of the fight, in a bout that Max was handily winning, ahead on every single scorecard and in every single round. Lamas, in desperation, called Holloway forward, and not shy of a gunfight. The Hawaiian, in one of the most badass moments of the sport up until that moment, pointed at the ground and beckoned forth a trade of violence. Both men swang desperate looping hooks at each other, caution to the wind, in an attempt to lay each other into unconsciousness, and whilst neither of them quite achieved that aim, what they did get was stamped right into the history books of one of the coolest moments the sport had seen, a moment that was destined to be played in the highlight reels of both men for all fights to come. Max had came away with a fantastic unanimous decision victory, and even at the same time, had managed to squeeze himself to becoming ranked 2 in the world. All he had to do was sit back now, let the featherweight division politics sort themselves out, and he was golden for his very first shot at a championship belt, a far cry from that man that had almost been kicked out of the UFC. As we know, just a month later, Aldo would defeat Edgar on the main card of UFC 200, grabbing with him along the way the interim UFC Featherweight World title. Well, Max Holloway would be pulled in on short notice to replace an upended main event at UFC 206. Daniel Cormier had pulled out of his upcoming light heavyweight world title fight against Anthony Johnson. With no big stars and no current champions to replace the missing headline, something the UFC always uses to front its pay-per-views, they resorted to the typical bullshit that they usually pull. Conor McGregor would be removed as the featherweight world champion, destroying their first ever simultaneous double champion and promoting Jose to undisputed champ. In turn, Max Holloway, the number 2 guy in the world, was thrusted into yet another interim featherweight world title against divisional newcomer and former lightweight world champion Anthony Pettis, a man you might know from the Wheaties box. He was a man coming off of his pretty remarkable guillotine choke against Charles Oliveira that was in his featherweight debut months previous. As far as matchups go, You know, it was alright, but most people could see through the marketing and political haze and see the fight for what it was, an excuse to wrap a belt around a fighter in a main event. If anyone deserved that opportunity though, it was Max. And so, this was it. 6 years competing in a sport, wins and losses, ups and downs, and this was finally his opportunity to claim his spot in the history books.
As soon as you attach a title to a fight, people believe you're going to see something other than maybe what you were going to see before, and it has more meaning. Does this fight really have any more meaning?
One thing growing up, I believed in myself, no matter what. And I was telling everybody, I'm gonna be a UFC fighter, you know. And every single one, people laughed. Every single one, someone laughed, you know.
This card has had many different changes to it, Dana. It was almost appropriate that the final day we had one more wrinkle in all of this with Anthony Pettis.
That fight has undergone a little bit of a change. It's still an interim featherweight championship fight for Max Holloway because he made weight. Anthony Pettis, however, weighed in at 148 pounds, which means if he wins on Saturday at UFC 206, the fight is still going to take place, but he will not be the interim champion.
I don't know if Pettis can make that weight. Pettis has made 46 before, but he's never actually made 45 that I know of. So it's a problem.
And this shit happens, you know. The guy didn't get his job done. I feel bad for the guy, you know. He had chance at history, but I'm glad that we still get the fight. Can't wait, man. I have nothing against Pettis, you know. He tried.
It's time! 5 rounds for the interim UFC Featherweight Championship of the world.
Holloway very confident on his feet. He's doing a great job of moving, throwing those shots. Another hard shot to the body. Yep. Pettis is in trouble. Holloway pouring it on.
Holloway looking to
He's
finish
melting.
it.
It's all over.
Wow!
Max Holloway finishes Anthony Pettis. Outstanding.
After throwing almost 100 strikes in round 3, compared to Anthony's 19 landed, Holloway drowned his opponent, finishing him with hooking body shots that crumbled his resolve. Pettis fell to the canvas, absolutely overwhelmed with strikes. Max had, at every single moment, an opportunity within the bout, completely outclassed the former lightweight world champion. It looked like Max was just on a different level entirely. His strikes were crisp, and he was even attempting and landing takedowns. And as always, his impressive cardio and crazy output were second to none. If it wasn't clear before, it was now. People just simply could not keep up with him inside of the cage. And so it was. Max, the interim featherweight world champion. He stood in the center of the octagon, the lights high above the cage, directly pointed at him as the belt shimmered. And there, he proclaimed in his goofy and entertaining way, "Where is Jose Waldo?"
We couldn't find Aldo, so I started calling him Waldo. Jose Waldo. Hashtag Jose Waldo.
And that was indeed a good question, because the belt now needed to be unified. Max didn't want to settle for less. He wanted to not only be undisputed, he wanted to be one of the greats, and that could only start with Jose on the other side of the cage.
I think he hasn't fought the top guys in the division. When you look at it, they weren't at the top. The top guys he fought were all tough fights, which went all 3 rounds.
He's a legend, you know, like I've been saying. I watched him when I was 17 years old. I'm 25 now, and I'm facing the guy, you know, that's a long time on top. I look at me like I'm the greatest, you know, that's that, and this ain't cockiness. Everybody's like, oh man, this kid is so cocky, he talks and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is confidence. You guys need to know the difference. You know, cockiness is over here saying wild make-believe shit. You know, I'm saying facts, and I'm saying real stuff.
It is one of the biggest nights of the year in sports here in beautiful Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Tonight, the King of Rio and one of Brazil's most beloved athletes and champions, Jose Aldo Jr. His mission once again is to exit as UFC Featherweight Champion. Third round of a possible 5 here to determine the undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion. Well, immediately following the main event, we will recap all of tonight's action from Rio on the UFC 212 post-fight show. Max Holloway knocks down Jose Aldo. That'll do it! Max Holloway! Max Holloway is the undisputed UFC Featherweight Champion. Hawaii, stand up!
The undisputed UFC featherweight title changes hands once more, its energy transferred to another man bidding to be the best. The crowd of Rio, once deafening in excitement and bloodthirst for their hometown hero, the king, falls quiet. For Holloway, this is it, the belt he had chased for years, now wrapped around his waist. Years of grinding, A long, arduous and testing journey, 11 straight wins, all validated at this one singular moment. The kid from Waianae, proving he belongs at the pinnacle of the sport. He ushers in, upon his shoulders, truly a new era for the division. The young blood seeking a new story to tell. He's no longer the underdog, he's the man, the target firmly on his back. Some kid in some gym, probably halfway across the world, now looks to the TV screen saying, "One day, I'll beat Max Blessed Holloway." The belt to Holloway isn't just metal and leather that will fade to rust and stardust. It's validation that he is one of the best to ever do it, something that will last eternal in the history books. And whilst the dream becomes reality for one, for the other, agony surely follows. The dream becomes a memory of what once was. Years of dominance for Jose unraveled, not in an instant like McGregor, but over the course of many rounds, where he had the chance to turn the tide, but alas he could not. There was no excuses this time. There was no lucky punch. The pressure wasn't too much this time, or the mind games too much. For the first time in his career, Jose would have to stare into the mirror knowing he was simply outclassed. And yet, Aldo's reign as a legend isn't erased. The absence of the belt does leave a void, but what has happened will always remain. He defined the featherweights for an era, but as time ticks on, and he draws into the late end of his career, the vultures have started to circle. UFC 212 was marked as the night the King of Rio was dethroned in his hometown, a sting lasting long into the nights ahead for him. Max was now the third man ever to call himself the UFC Featherweight Champion of the world, which is really quite something when you imagine that the organization had been running since 1996, and now it was 2017. The 145ers were late to the game, and Jose had dominated for years. Considering Jose's success at the top, many thought that he might indeed end up in an immediate rematch with Holloway, but I think the UFC knew that they had to move away from him for a little bit. He had been in every single title fight since the inception of the division, and so they wanted some new blood, right? Well, not exactly. After stringing 2 wins together against top-ranked guys, the ever-durable Frankie Edgar had worked his way back to the title. They were scheduled to face off against each other at UFC 218, but a little less than a month before the bout, Frankie would unfortunately pull from the matchup citing an injury. The UFC needed a late replacement, and there was one man who thought that he was up for the challenge.
From a fight in the making to a fight that's breaking, former lightweight belt holder Frankie Edgar is out of his featherweight title fight with champion Max Holloway. Edgar is injured, and he will not face Holloway at UFC 218 December 2nd.
Waianae UFC Featherweight Champion Max Blessed Holloway has a rematch on his hands.
They will run it back. It will be Holloway versus Aldo 2.
What better replacement can we have than the former reigning champion in Jose Aldo? The guy was dominant for so many years that, you can't help but be like, all right, let's give you another shot. You've earned it over the years of hard work and dominating performances is at 145, so who knows how it's going to go. Jose's always a risk for anybody when he steps into that octagon.
Trying to survive. His face is a mask of blood. And Holloway all over him.
Stop this thing soon. That'll do it. Max Holloway has defended his undisputed featherweight championship.
The canvas of the octagon played host to an echo of that Aldo that had once built an empire atop the 145ers. Moments of that legend could be seen, the leg kicks, the crisp striking, but it simply was folly. If it wasn't obvious before, it was now. Aldo's prime had slipped away. Holloway's pressure took its toll. The mounting strikes and the forward movement of the champ unraveled Jose to his end in the 3rd round, lasting only 40 seconds longer than their first outing. From almost a decade without losing, to being finished 3 times out of his last 4 fights, the question now became, was Aldo's time in this division coming to its most natural, most brutal of endings? And if not the division, perhaps the sport entirely? Only time will tell. And it's something that we will come back to later in this video. Holloway at this point was destined to be one of those rare fighters whose legacy rises steadily, fight by fight, a career that you could look back on when it's all said and done and say, that man was one of the greatest fighters to ever live, his win streak becoming ever more so unreachable every outing, and his skills and confidence was erupting into its prime. A second win against Jose really hammered it home. This was a new era for the sport, a new man to usher in a new chapter, and what better example of a champion was there than the charismatic and chilled out Hawaiian Max Blessed Holloway. Edgar had rightfully earned his shot, and so despite the unfortunate injury, the UFC offered him an immediate rescheduling of the bout with Max. It was to be a quick turnaround for the Hawaiian, headlining UFC 222 in March. Max was priming to be an active champion, and not only that, he would do so by taking on the top men standing in his path. Needless to say, this activity puts pressure on the body. These athletes walk a fine line, and so something was destined to break. On February 3rd of 2018, Max pulled out of the pay-per-view citing a leg injury, leaving Frankie snubbed of his title shot once more. The UFC, desperate to keep the card entertaining, would keep Frankie in the co-main event, and he would be taking on an up-and-coming prospect. Max entered rehab and was expected to defend his title soon. The UFC marched on with the featherweight title temporarily suspended. April 1st rolled around, and one of the most infamous moments in the sport was about to drag Holloway in, and it wasn't an April Fool's.
Tony Ferguson hurt himself. He tore his LCL.
He was scheduled to face Khabib Nurmagomedov for the real title, UFC 223 in Brooklyn, just a week away. Now Tony is out, so what happens to UFC 223?
Well, the beautiful thing is we were able to pull together the champ at 145 pounds, Max Holloway, to fight Khabib for the 155-pound championship.
In what was becoming one of the most cursed fights in the UFC, Tony would trip over a wire in anticipation for his upcoming UFC lightweight title unification bout against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Max Holloway would step up on literally 6 days short notice to take on one of the most feared men in the sport. If the Warrior managed to pull off the victory, he would become the second man ever to hold 2 belts in 2 different divisions simultaneously, second only to the one and the only Conor McGregor. Talk about the cyclical nature of this division. It was a tall order, but Max had this unwavering confidence in himself and his abilities. He seemed calm and relaxed, and for a man who was coming off of an injury and had no fights booked, it was pretty impressive to say the least. Tony, on the other hand, would be stripped of his interim title, and the lightweight division would sadly pass him by. Weigh-ins rolled around, and well, things got even worse.
Medically unfit. That's what Max Holloway was told overnight about his opportunity. The Blessed One had a chance to have his toughest challenge ever.
Max Holloway is out of the fight, unfit to fight, they said. So what do you do? What do you do if you Khabib Nurmagomedov?
Max Holloway got pulled from the card. He couldn't make weight. It was reported that he weighed about 159, and they stopped him from cutting more weight because it was getting too dangerous.
Max, the 145er, couldn't make the lightweight limit on 6 days' notice, or at least that's what everyone thought. The truth, however, was a little bit deeper.
We just got the New York thing, you know, like we just finally is in New York. New York don't even want us there. Like they're fucking looking for every single possible way to get rid of fucking MMA in this over there, you know. And I'm like, bro, I'm like 4 pounds away from making the weight, and I'm gonna like it's tough, but I'm gonna get there. Like I know I'm gonna get there, you know. They come in, they checked, they looked at me, and they said, "You don't look good. You can't do it." That's all that happened, and it walked out.
That's so ridiculous.
I wasn't fighting.
That's so stupid. How frustrating was that?
Oh, it was heartbreaking. I had my whole family.
The New York Athletic Commission had only just recently allowed the sport of MMA into the city. There had been back and forth between the UFC and the Big Apple for years. They were terrified of the brutal spectacle and couldn't appreciate the delicate dance that unfolds in the octagon. And so it was no wonder that the commissioners, hungry on power, were a bit twitchy. Max, more than likely, and by his own admission, could have made weight, but the commissioners saw it another way, and so the MMA world was robbed of one of the most interesting matchups of that era. A shame really in retrospect. What could have been, I suppose. Khabib would ultimately take on barely ranked Ally Quinter for the lightweight title, extending his win streak against the B leagues of the lightweight division, whilst at the same time being heralded as the greatest athlete the sport had ever known. Al actually gave Khabib a tough time as well, which makes it even funnier really. Max grazed by an opportunity of a lifetime. Down on his luck, he returned to the featherweight division. So what happened to Frankie Edgar? Well, he would end up taking that relatively short notice matchup against up-and-coming undefeated featherweight Brian Ortega all the way back in March at UFC 222. Brian was a flashy submission specialist, touting a prestigious Gracie lineage and a man who could back up his ground threat with some decent hands. Frankie put his title shot opportunity on the line against him, which, to be honest, was an extremely ballsy thing to do. The UFC must have paid him well, because in just one round, Bryan would impressively knock out the New Yorker, not only taking his title shot opportunity, but his #1 ranking as well. People were pretty high on Ortega already. He looked the part, and he wasn't afraid to finish a fight with one of his slick submissions, but to knock Frankie out the way that he did, well, the fan base went into a spiral. Now not only could he choke you to death, but all of a sudden he had one-punch knockout power. Now that's a legitimate threat to Holloway's throne, a worthy challenger, and a scary one at that. It didn't take the UFC long to put the matchup together. On April 21st, 2018, it was announced that the pair would serve as the main event. Fight week rolled around in July, but something wasn't quite right.
It's the biggest week of the year for the UFC, International Fight Week, but sadly the storyline that's quickly stolen the spotlight here in Las Vegas is the mystery of Max Holloway.
You were the one who initially threw up the red flag. When you saw him, you just felt like he looked too tired, or what?
Well, he was slurring his words. He looked half asleep.
Tired? What's going on? How's the weight? You look a little sleepy.
I'm good, man. I'm good. A little bit tired. They got me doing a bunch of media stuff.
You okay, Max? Everything good? And he's just like, you know, he was slurring. Simple as that.
I think it's concussion related, and some people think it's weight cutting related. So they haven't really got down to the bottom of what it is.
Holloway's now been forced to pull out of his last 3 fights, all of which were scheduled in 2018.
When we look back at this event, years removed, many still hail it as the day that the fighter's fighter, Michael Bisping, essentially saved Holloway from something far more severe. It was described as concussion-like symptoms that had him withdraw from the fight, but no one knew exactly what it was. For me, it just represented everything that these fighters put on the line. Not only at the end of the day do they have to step in the octagon and clatter the shit out of each other, but in the process leading up to that most brutal of moments, they pushed their bodies to the absolute extreme. Weight cutting, workouts, diets, honing and crafting their bodies into this perfect violent machine. And the end result during media week? Well, it's men who looked like they're on death's door. Holloway on this occasion really stood out. He was completely out of it, and Bisping was right. There was no way that this man should have been fighting. The fight was scrapped and rescheduled for UFC 231 in December. Same opponent, just a new venue. Napoleon Bonaparte's longtime crush Valentina Shevchenko was sitting pretty in the co-main event. This time though, everything went a little bit smoother. The featherweights were about to cap off 2018 with a bang.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event of the evening. Presented by EA Sports UFC 3. Sanctioned by the Ontario Athletic Commission. Our 3 judges scoring this contest in octagon side are David Therian, Sal Diamato, and Jason Rogers.
And Brian T-City Ortega is in blue. Holloway is in the black and gold. Befitting a champion, we are underway.
Look at this.
30 seconds to go in the round.
Ortega is busted up. At the end of the 3rd round, he's like, this is my round.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Yeah, I told you. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Fucking cardio, man. His cardio is incredible.
Okay, the Ortega thing, when you grab the hand and kind of teach him how to
Yeah,
block.
I was just telling him, brother, you know, I don't know who your coach is, but this is where he belongs.
That might be it. That's it. That's it.
I think Holloway just won. Ortega can't get off on it. So.
Tell you what, then, I want to be the #1 pound for pound. If this guy's at 55, let's do it. If it's the Daddest man, my good friend Daniel Cormier, bring it on. Let's go.
Last thing from me, Dana was in here earlier, and I'm sure you've been asked about it already. Wants you to go up to lightweight.
Dana White is the boss. You know, the boss is looking for super fights. You know, all the UFC guys, you guys be talking about me fighting at 55 for super fights. So
Max's ceaseless pressure overwhelmed Ortega, whose body failed before his heart. The ref and the doctor would call an end to the fight at the close of the 4th. Bryan's face had been disfigured beyond recognition, his eye sockets swollen, blood drizzling down his countenance. Ortega had played puppet to a masterclass in striking. Those high on the challenger's hands, as a product of his own outing with Edgar, found their excitement misplaced. Max had reminded the undefeated fighter that there are indeed levels to this game, even teaching him how to defend himself mid-fight. And so in turn, the champ had handed Bryan his first loss in the sport of mixed martial arts. In the round that preceded the finish, Max threw in the span of just 5 minutes 203 strikes down the barrel at his opponent. 203, that's the second most ever in featherweight history in a single round. 203 strikes is more than many fighters will ever achieve in an entire 15-minute bout, and almost double what the average is. Think about that fact for a moment. and Holloway did it in 5 minutes. It truly was a clinic. Dana White would bless Holloway with not only the performance of the night, but also fight of the night, and he had well and truly earned that honour, his second defence of the title secured, and his featherweight legacy preserved. In the fallout of one of the biggest selling pay-per-views of all time, Khabib would be hit with a big suspension and fine for, well, turning into the Dagestani eagle and clawing out Dylan Dennis's eyeballs. The suspension meant that the UFC would either have to strip him, or alternatively, put an interim title on the line, and you goddamn know already without me even saying what direction they were going in. It's just that the men vying for the interim title was a little less clear. The A side was obviously Tony Ferguson, the man who had just fought on the same card as Khabib and Conor and picked up a victory in one of the UFC's bloodiest fights against Anthony Pettis. Tony was the #1 ranked lightweight in the world, and his place in this matchup was clear. The B side, well, probably Dustin Poirier, considering everyone else in the top 10 at lightweight was basically coming off of losses. Tony was one of the biggest stars in the sport, and his miraculous return after a devastating injury had ignited large amounts of fan interest and hype. Tony had also been the victim of the UFC money machine. Conor realistically should never have been in that title fight against Khabib. In fact, Tony should never have really been stripped of the interim title in the first place. And well, Tony was pretty vocal about his problems with the UFC brass, and so the next move pulled by Dana White and his team was just about as ridiculous as it got.
Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway 2
in Atlanta on April 13th
for the lightweight interim title.
They fought back in 2012.
Max Holloway would be moving up to lightweight once again, this time with hopes of actually competing in the division, and he would be taking on a man who had beaten him in his UFC debut. Holloway had been offered a chance of redemption against the Diamond, and Dustin, who had come so close multiple times to a title shot, had finally paved his path to it, and it's not like he hadn't earned it either. He had overcome a murderer's row of the lightweight gold standard, Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, and Justin Gaethje respectfully. I got to say, in this era of the UFC, for me personally, this was one of the most exciting matchups that the UFC could produce. Holloway could match Dustin strike for strike and cardio for cardio, and now we could truly see, with both of these men at their peak, what they were truly capable of inside of the octagon, not the young and inexperienced kids that had met each other all those years ago in their first outing. If Max could pull this off, then, well, he would transcend divisional greatness to something else entirely.
We have 40 fights between us in the UFC. I mean, this is going to be a hell of a fight, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the moment, the challenge. Not only do I accept this and look forward to this, I honor this. I go to bed at night. I can't wait. 25 minutes. Let's go.
It's simple. I have a simple relationship with the UFC. I tell them, give me the toughest guy, the hardest fight, and I send the contract back. This is where I gotta be the #1 professional fighter. Let's go. You know, if I gotta go up a weight class, 2, 3, 4, 5.
How do you get such salon quality hair?
You know, you don't want to wash too much.
I want to go out there and have people scratching their head like, who is that guy? So that's the plan Saturday night.
I go in there not to win rounds. I go in there to hurt these guys and get them out of there. So we'll see what happens Saturday night, but I'm coming in there to take him out.
He gave me a stoppage. I'm going to go give him a stoppage.
I know for a fact I have what it takes to beat him for a second time. I'm going to beat Max Holloway April 13th. Again.
Ovation has already started here in Atlanta.
Dustin the Diamond!
At UFC 236, Holloway stood on the precipice of something extraordinary, something rarely seen in the sport of MMA, a simultaneous 2-division champion. It was a rematch 7 years in the making, but this time, it wasn't a quick finish that undid Max, it was a grueling 5-round war. And even still, the victory slipped through the gaps in his fingers, so close to greatness, yet so far. The fight itself was a brutal testament to both men's wills. Poirier's power seemed to be the deciding factor. Even still, Max threw a mind-boggling 446 strikes, but it was Holloway's face that wore the damage, a physical manifestation of the power that Dustin had found at lightweight. Holloway pressed on through the cuts and welts, and yet it was still not enough. The judges' scorecards were read, 49-46 across the board. Poirier had secured his second win, handing Holloway his first loss at lightweight and raising his dreams of a second belt to ash and rust. It was all love in the octagon though. Dustin, ever the man, pointed at Holloway and said, "To be the best, you've got to beat the best, and the best is blessed." Despite the loss, he had proven that he could hang with the lightweights, something that may or may not become relevant in years to come. Holloway certainly hadn't lost any fan favour. He put on a war, a fight of the night, and perhaps even fight of the year, and even still he was the man at featherweight, and so Max didn't really dwell on it. He strove for greatness and fell just short. What more can any man do? And so he picked himself up and strove onward. 3 months later he was back at featherweight, defending his 145-pound throne against Frankie Edgar, who at this point had been snubbed twice at his third shot at UFC gold due to injuries on both sides. And whilst at the time there was potentially some more deserving men to challenge Holloway, Edgar, in a kind of pitiful way, was offered his chance coming off just a singular win against number 4 ranked Cub Swanson, and perhaps he did deserve it for simply being the man that he was. The entire top 10 had essentially consumed themselves, and the UFC's strange matchmaking had all but destroyed any lengthy win streaks in the division, leaving Frankie Edgar to climb to the top of the pile. But taking on Holloway was going to be no easy task for the UFC vet. Frankie had just shy of 15 years of combat under his belt, damage, heartbreak, training camp after training camp gnawing away at his body, and here he was, expected to take on not only a young champion, but a man who in his very own words was knocking on the door of the greatest featherweight of all time. You had to respect Frankie's drive, but it might just have been misplaced.
Like I said, I'm trying to be the best pound for pound fighter in the world, not the best featherweight in the world. I'm trying to be the best pound for pound fighter in the world, and Frankie's one of the guys to help me one step towards that goal.
So Max Holloway just dominated Frankie Edgar over 5 rounds. Holloway's got his work cut out for him in the near future, but even still, went 5 rounds, made it look easy against a vet like Frankie Edgar.
He's a motherfucker. Dude, Max Holloway is a real fucking warrior. I mean, to the core.
You've got
and Max Holloway, always a big fan favorite, probably the greatest featherweight of all time.
The way he fights, the octagon IQ that he shows, predatory behavior inside the octagon, I think he's the best.
A narrative has started, which is that Max is the best featherweight of all time. And that narrative may well prove itself to be true.
Like, this is a guy who keeps getting better every time we see him.
Aldo's resume is great. It's incredible, but he doesn't have consistent wins like Max in the modern era.
Constantly peppering you, constantly on your kick, knee, punch, move forward, and you're just dealing with him and trying to breathe. You don't get any breath, and he just keeps that pressure on you.
In the fallout of Holloway's third title defense, many people had begun to speculate that Max may indeed be the greatest featherweight in the world, especially considering that he had conquered the consensus GOAT on 2 occasions. Not only was Max technically masterful, he also had that extra thing that defines those who go on to write their name into the annals of history. Call it what you want, heart, resolve, fearlessness, whatever it is, Max had it. It carried him through those initial losses early in his UFC career, those points of learning and re-education under the brightest of lights. The Max that came back would string together the longest winning streak in UFC featherweight history, a record that still stands to this very day, a testament to how truly spectacular Max is as a competitor. It's hard to really put together a sentence that summarizes just how high people were on Max at the time. He looked unbeatable in his natural weight class. He had all but cleared out his division, and whilst he had fallen short of double championship status, he was still nothing to be scoffed at. At the age of just 27, he had 5 title wins and a 14-fight win streak. That is what champions are made of. And whilst there are champions inside of the cage, there are those who carry that spirit into their communities. The fight game had elevated Max into a place very few would in their lifetime, and he wasn't about to keep all of that for himself. Waianae, the poor and desperate place, hanging on by just a thread, was also raised upward any chance Holloway had. Charity events, community outreach, personal acts of generosity. Unlike others who tear from their roots, Max had never left that island behind. Whilst we can find the headlines that mark moments of Holloway's kindness, the streets, the roads, the homes, that's where secrets of Max philanthropy lie. He doesn't do it for publicity, he does it for his people so that they don't have to be raised in a home like he did. For the rest of the globe, he'll always just be remembered as a champion of the world, one of the greatest fighters to ever grace the octagon, but in Y&I, he'll be remembered for something else entirely. That's what a legacy is, and legacies, in no matter what direction, must always continue. As I said, Max had all but cleared out his division, but there was one more challenger lurking in the top echelon. His time for a title shot had come, but unlike Max, this man was late to the world of mixed martial arts. His time as a pro athlete started in a different sport entirely.
And it goes to Crossdale, and Ali Crossdale crosses the line.
That is a 215-pound, 22-year-old Alexander Volkanovski, a professional rugby player.
You know, NFL, you got the blockers, right? Like they're big. You know, I was pretty much playing that type of position where usually the guys are, you know, twice the size of fucking me.
That's heavier than me.
I was just a fucking ball.
It's not often that a story of a future legend of the sport of MMA starts at such a relatively old age and in such a wildly different discipline. But there were lessons to be learned in this brutal and gritty sport.
You think that rugby background like also influenced your desire to?
Yeah, for sure. That's what I mean by life experience, like
other.
through sport. You know what I mean? My brother just beating each other, all that.
It was on his off season, where Alex still needed to stay in shape, that he would decide to start doing some MMA training.
So I actually started MMA training as just to keep fit while I was playing rugby league.
Even though he'd only stepped onto the gym floors simply to stay in shape in pursuit of his rugby career, the fight game swallowed him whole. It turns out that he had had a yearning for controlled violence. Alex had previously dabbled in wrestling when he was a teen, just for a year, and even then he had managed to win a national title. I guess it should have been obvious to him then that he was well suited for a life in martial arts, but he had dropped his talents in wrestling to pursue rugby, something that he would do for the next 10 years. And whilst he was making a decent income as a league player in rugby and as a concreter for his family's business, he knew that off-season, falling in love with MMA, that he had to make a choice. And well, a year later we would see Volk take his first steps towards the cage as a professional. But there was one twist that even I didn't know until researching this video. He was making that walk as a goddamn welterweight. After 5 years in the sport, Alex had amassed an impressive record of 13-1, defined not only by his mixture of knockouts, submissions and grueling decisions, but also his propensity to move in and out of weight classes. In his most recent fight, he had earned the Wollongong lightweight championship belt, placed next to his 7 other titles won across welterweight and featherweight respectively. Volk wasn't just winning, he was making statement after statement. The man simply wanted to brawl, no matter the circumstances. His winning streak showcased his natural inclination to athletic success. Whilst only dabbling in wrestling for a brief time as a teen, Volk had no real background to speak of in MMA. He just jumped in head first, feeling that call to violence. When I look back at Alex's career, I like to imagine how different he could have been as an MMA athlete if he had grown up in a dojo, a boxing gym, or even on the jiu-jitsu mats. It's hard to appreciate what kind of prowess could have been developed, considering just how naturally Volk had taken to the sport relatively late in his life. He was behind the curve, but if one thing was true, it was that he had certainly made up for lost time. It is no wonder this spectacular run through the regional scene in Australia caught the attention of the premier organisation. The UFC scouted Volk to join the company and to make his debut in his home country of Australia. He would be paired up against Yosuke Kasuya in a lightweight bout to take place at UFC Fight Night 101 in November of 2016. For perspective, This was just a month before Max Holloway would fight Anthony Pettis for the interim featherweight title. Volk had finally realized many men's lifelong dream of joining the UFC, but he had something more in mind for where his career would end up, something more befitting of his fighting name, greatness.
All right, let's jump into Volkanovski is minus 160 against Kasayu. There's a lot of hype around Volkanovski here, Lou, with hardcore fans. 13-1. He's on a 10-fight win streak.
Done a name change at the last minute just before the big fight. It's going to be Alexander the Great. And the reason for this is you're probably thinking, what? For all the people that love the Hulk, it just obviously doesn't suit me. I'm a midget.
Australia, Alexander the Great Volkanovski.
Nice takedown there. I like how he's hovering over his opponent right now. He's so accurate with these shots, John.
So I remember just sitting there, so at the start I was like, he wasn't moving. So I was like, he's out. He wasn't out, he just couldn't move.
Alexander the Great Volkanovski.
It took Alex only 7 minutes to dominate his first opponent inside the 8-sided cage that makes up the UFC octagon. Alex had proven his worth in the finest crucible the earth has to offer, and he had done it in impressive fashion. The fight was a grueling slog on the ground as the two men vied for dominance and exchanged positional advantages, but it was ultimately the heart and grit of the man they call the Great that would overcome the Japanese warrior. Although Alexander had taken his debut fight in the UFC at lightweight, he now wanted to move down to featherweight, where he more than likely would perform the best. We wouldn't see him for 6 months, but the time was not wasted. Training away and perfecting his craft on the prestigious gym floors of New Zealand City Kickboxing under the guidance of legendary coach Eugene Behrman, Volk's UFC featherweight debut was booked. He would be taking on his second Japanese fighter in the organization, Mizuto Hirota, at UFC Fight Night 110 on the 11th of June 2017. This would be the start of a dominant 2-year run through the featherweight rankings.
Why couldn't you
I want to fight regularly. I want to fight, I'm ready to fight. Even with these black eyes, I'll go in there in 2 weeks and get another fight. So I want another couple of fights this year. So if you could give me another one, bring them on.
all this time? Why couldn't you
Mizuto Hirota, Shane Young, Jeremy Kennedy, Darren Elkins, all victims to Alexander's conquest over the featherweights. Whether it was devastating elbows that were hammered into the cranium of Jeremy Kennedy, or the disfigurement of Elkins' facial features that left him unrecognizable, Volk had certainly proven a point with his gutsy performances. His work ethic was unquestionable. These sets of performances had not only placed him fittingly at 10th in the world at featherweight, but it also provided a platform for him to showcase his complete mixed martial arts game. But perhaps more importantly, we got to see the good guy that Alex really is. Whilst he wasn't generating massive buzz in the space, those who had the pleasure of joining him on one of his interviews or stumbling across his social media page got an early insight into what a charismatic and well-meaning man he truly was. A complete contrast to those who had built careers off of shit-talking and an alpha male attitude. Volk was a true gentleman and was not about to sell himself out to climb up the ranks. He was working his way up the hard way, and now he was at a crossroads. It was time for the UFC to really test his mettle, and that would come in the form of Chad Mendes. It was now 3 years removed from his third bid at UFC Gold, where he was dismantled by McGregor in 2015. Since then, Chad had had a rather interesting few years in the sport. 6 months after the pretty devastating performance against the enigmatic Irishman, Chad would quite literally be forced to do an Ian Gary Cuck maneuver and serve as the main event for the tough final for McGregor's season of The Ultimate Fighter, where he served as a coach alongside Chad's head coach Uriah Faber. The fight would ultimately continue Mendez's string of unfortunate events, when for the first time in his career, he would lose 2 fights in a row, being knocked out by Frankie Edgar in just 2 minutes. And in the turn of the new year, 2016, Chad would get the final nail in the coffin for his time spent in title contention. On July 20th, it was announced that Mendes had tested positive for growth hormone releasing hexapeptide. According to Mendes, he hadn't done his research properly, and that the skin medication that he used to treat his eczema had contained the banned substance. And you know what, it's not like the team had ever been constantly accused of cheating before, so it wasn't suspicious in any way, shape or form. And let's face it, Chad never looked like the type of guy that would be on steroids anyway. For his accidental intake of human growth hormones, he would be hit with a 2-year suspension from the sport. He took it in his stride though, growing a YouTube channel, hunting, and doing what all Team Alpha Male prospects do, looking in the mirror more than likely, or photo shoots. The seasons changed, the clock ticked, and all but in the blink of an eye to the universe. His suspension was spent. On the 7th of May 2018, it was announced that Mendes would return to take on number 12 ranked Miles Jury on the main card of a fight night taking place later in the year in July. Mendes wouldn't waste time, knocking out Jury in just half a round, emphatically placing himself back inside the top 10, the media organizations blessing him with a 7 next to his name in respect to what he had accomplished those 2 years ago. Chad had made it extremely clear with the performance that he had only improved in his time away. He was back, and he was hungry, and so just 6 months later, he would find himself opening up the main card of UFC 232. His story had now crossed tracks with Alexander. This fight was one of the most important in the division, with title contention essentially on the line. The question was, could Chad get his 4th shot at UFC gold, or could the surging UFC featherweight Alexander Volkanovski climb graciously to the foot of the throne with undefeated divisional perfection?
Chad Money Mendes made his return to the UFC octagon after serving a 2-year suspension, winning with an impressive first-round knockout. We spoke to him about his upcoming fight this Saturday in LA.
Sticking to that game plan, getting in there, whooping his butt, and getting my hand raised. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, he's only lost to the greats, so nothing taken away. But I don't think his passion's there like it used to be. In our styles, we're gonna cancel a lot of things out. So I think I'm gonna catch him because of that. If not, like I said, I just don't think his head's in the game like it used to be. I think I'm going to bring him into deep waters if it goes that long.
Your pace is so ferocious, and you can keep that up for 25 minutes where you're never fading.
Yep.
It's so giant, man. The difference between a guy who fades and a guy who doesn't fade, it's so big. Because so many guys, especially when you see guys that are coming up in the ranks, they're kind of contenders, they're doing really well. You'll see them do real well in a fight for the first 2 rounds, and then you'll see a substantial drop off in the 3rd round. And that seems to be the difference between the really elite guys. And I know a lot of it is energy management for sure, but a lot of it is just that work that you do in the gym to make sure that you can push that crazy pace.
In a hard-fought, highly skilled fight, both fighters brought it to one another, Mendes even rocking Alex, but it was the great heart and resolve that triumphed inside of the cage that night. Mendes would wilt under the ceaseless tide of Volk's pressure, eventually being knocked out over halfway through the 2nd round, leaving Volk to cement himself in the top 5 of the featherweights, a prestigious place to be, but it is also the waters where the sharks roam, as he was soon to find out. Alex had certainly proven that he was the rightful next contender to the title. The UFC had other plans though. Max Holloway would ultimately take on Dustin in a bid for a 2nd title, and that left 2 men in the division looking to be next in line. Alex was certainly one of them, and the other was Jose Aldo, an immovable object in the division who, despite losing to the Hawaiian champion twice, had not left the top echelon. He had re-cemented his position since his 2nd loss to Max by knocking out Renato Moicano and Jeremy Stevens in back-to-back performances of the night. And so, the UFC saw their opportunity, a title eliminator fight to take place just 1 month after Holloway's excursion to a heavier weight class. This was it. It was Alexander's moment.
Got a big one ahead, fighting at Rio, UFC 237. Looking forward to this one, it's a big one, Aldo, Jose Aldo, such a big fight, such a big name. is a really important fight for me, and can't wait to go out there and do my thing.
I think every fight I do in there is very important, but this is, I guess you could call it a turning point. I'm really hungry and I want to win it because of that, because I have this entire path planned out in my head.
Aldo's still Aldo. He's still a very dangerous fighter, very explosive. He always was. He was even dangerous with Max. But, you know, people, you're always going to, you know, if he loses, oh, he had an off day. But, you know, styles make fights. Max puts the pressure on. Max had good footwork, and I think he found a few holes in Aldo's game.
I think so. I think when you're a champion, everyone says you're the best in the world. But when you lose, they don't even look at the quality of your opponent, but the way that you lost. Not only did they underestimate me, they said it was the end for me, that my career was over, that I'll only serve as a ladder to others, but not me. I knew I was going to lose one day. Loss is a part of an athlete's career, not just in MMA. So I had to learn from it and deal with it.
I'm the only one who has a clear run at the title, really, you know, undefeated, taking out all the top guys, taking out #1 guy. The only guy that beat Aldo that's there is Max Holloway, the champ, you know what I mean? So, but letting me fight Aldo, I go out and win, sorry Frank, but I'm ahead. You know, my undefeated run's going to go, and it's just going to continue, because you're not going to get the same Alex Volkanovski you've seen last fight. I'm going to be a level up again. As you said, King of Rio, the greatest featherweight of all time. It's just a huge win for me. But you know, it's just 30-27 over, you know, a legend like that is just unreal. And you know, we all know what I want next, and you know, I want that title.
Since joining the WEC back in 2008, Jose Aldo, the King of Rio, had only ever lost to two men, two champions, two greats. May 11th, 2019 would mark the day that the man often described as the greatest featherweight of all time would lose to a ranked contender rather than a man with a belt. That day also marked the last time that we would ever see Aldo fight at 145 pounds again. His time ruling and haunting that division had come to a dramatic end. His legacy, fuel for Alexander to continue his ascent, and in a way, I guess that truly marks how incredible Jose was. When people validate UFC reigns in the featherweight division, it lives and dies as to whether you had beaten the Brazilian or not. Max would never be considered a legend if he hadn't done what he had done to Jose. McGregor would have never rocketed into the stratosphere of popularity if he hadn't have done what he had done to any other man than Aldo. Their stories are built off of a man who struggled to escape the favelas and managed to climb valiantly to the top of the world. And not only did he stay there, he dominated, undefeated for all but a decade, and now the twilight of his career had fallen upon him. He would be unceremoniously kicked out of the division that he had called his own by Alexander Volkanovski. And if you want to know how that went and what he did after this, well then there's a video waiting for you. Volkanovski had done the seemingly impossible, asserted himself as the #1 ranked rightful contender, and now there was only one more man, one more legend standing in his way. On September 22nd, it was announced that Max Holloway would defend his title for the 4th time against Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 245. In the final pay-per-view of 2019, the UFC were closing the year out with an absolute banger, 3 title fights in the main card, and the featherweight clash was certainly one to be remembered. Volkanovski was clearly the greatest challenger to arise from the bowels of the division in recent memory, and yet he was still a +160 underdog. Max, the man with a chin of granite, relentless cardio, and an elusive striking game, was simply unbeatable in the eyes of the fans. But Volk was here to do what he had always done, prove the doubters wrong. It's just this time, his crucible for doing so had never been bigger.
Fighting in our sport, fighting in mixed martial arts, being a fighter is the hardest thing ever in this whole world. Any other sport, baseball, basketball, soccer, you can have a shitty day, but guess what? Next week, 2 days later, 4 days later, you got another match to remind people why you are great. When you fight one time, one night, you can look terrible, you can look like you can just have an off night,
and you can't go back and step into the octagon for 4 to 6 months.
Max is a great champion, you know what I mean? So I'm expecting him to be a tough fight, but at the same time, man, I know I've said it, I'm the man for the job, and I really do believe that. And I get to show the world that in, 2 days?
That's just what it is, you know. I get nervous before every fight. Every fight I'm in the back going in my head and be like, what am I doing here? I told myself this was the last time. But now I'm here telling myself this is the last time, but then I start thinking, like, what else can I be doing?
Really don't, you know, a lot of people will probably feel the pressure and things like that. I just don't feel it. I literally, I'm chill. I'm always chill. I just play what's in front of me, man. I think that's the trick.
It is what it is, you know. I thought I did enough, and we just see, you know. I don't want to sound like a sore loser, you know. Only three opinions mattered tonight, and it didn't go my way.
And the new. Tell me what it sounds like. Tell me what it feels like when you hear that sound.
Mate, it feels good, you know what I mean? Like when people start saying that, like it's starting to soak in a little bit, but it still hasn't. Man, I'm sure I would have told you before, like when I go into these fights, I'm always so level-headed and composed that I don't let it all get to me. So I'm just a regular bloke, and now I'm holding the world title, you know what I mean? It's just a blowout, it really is.
As the judges' scorecards were read, 48-47, Volkanovski's arm was shot upward toward the glittering lights, his face a mix of disbelief and conquest. Dana White wrapped the belt around his waist, glittering weaves of aureate. He had just beaten one of the featherweight division's most dominant champions, a man who had held the belt for over 2 years and had seemed untouchable. The UFC Championship belt itself was more than a trinket. It represented the pinnacle of mixed martial arts, a testament to any man's mastery of the sport worthy of claiming it. Crown forged in violence, earned through a gauntlet of blood-soaked battles, Volkanovski's path to the title was paved with sweat, tears and blood, left for all to see on the canvas. But it is the battles that no one sees that the victory is secured. Outside of the chain-linked fence, it is the brutal training camps, endless hours of sparring, grappling and conditioning, often pushing his body to the brink, months spent away from his young family, battling it out with men who were also chasing the same dream, sacrificing all the while. And now here, Volkanovski stood manifesting all that he had sought, the belt cinched around his waist. Whilst Volkanovski rose, Holloway sank into the bitter ashes of what might have been. For 2 years, the Hawaiian had stood proud atop the division, vanguarding the 145ers into a new era, leaving the echoes of Aldo and McGregor to fade as he himself went on to become one of the greats of the featherweights. And now here he was, the cinders of his 14-fight featherweight win streak lay at his feet. To be the best, you have to beat the best, and the best is blessed. That is at least what they say. He had won the belt with prestige, with honor, and led the sport as a true ambassador. It was now Volkanovski's turn, but Max's time headlining arenas, battling it out in title fights, securing big paychecks was not over. Far from it. He may not be champion now, but he had secured his position as one of the biggest stars in the sport 10 times over. And to that end, it was no surprise considering everything that Holloway had achieved that he would be offered an immediate rematch. And so in June of 2020, it was announced that the pair would find themselves across the octagon from one another once more at UFC 251. I'm not a massive fan of immediate rematches. I think that often the division needs an opportunity to shake out, but if anyone had deserved it, it was Holloway.
Max Holloway, round 2, July 11th. I've got something to prove. We ain't going 5 rounds.
Joined by the A side of the co-main event, Alex Volkanovski, the featherweight champ who defends his belt for the first time against Max Holloway.
I've got something to prove. You know, I really do have something to prove. I'm a little upset. I feel a little disrespected how things have been. But, you know, that just makes me, it's motivation. It really is. I'm motivated right now. I've got something to prove. I know I can outsmart him. I know I can outvolley him, you know, but, you know, a lot of people think he can't be finished. That's my goal now. I'm going to go set a real statement, take out Max Holloway, finish him inside the 5, and let everyone know, no doubt.
What is it about his demeanor where you say Alex is acting like a challenger?
I mean, did you guys interview him yet? Any of you guys interview him here? Like, how is he talking? Is he talking like a champion? You're champ, what you trying to prove? You know, if you believe you're the champ, who you trying to prove anything to? I'm not trying to prove anything to no one. I know as a champ, you know,
the judges for decision. David Letby scores the contest 48-47. Holloway. Mark Millett scores it 48-47. Volkanovski. And Clemens Turner scores it 48-47 for the winner by split decision.
Maybe 1 round for Volkanovski.
Yeah.
I feel bad for Max, man.
I had Max winning the fight. I thought he won the fight.
I think it was a robbery. I had it 3-2 for Holloway, for sure.
You can't leave it to these guys. We got some bad judging. And I don't know, has Max been in here yet? I'm sure he's devastated and, you know.
The fight was as close as it could possibly get, and Volkanovski was lucky, to say the least, that he walked away remaining the champion. I, for one, sitting there at 6 a.m. in the morning, was certain that Holloway had secured victory. The knockdown in the first, and his clear dominance in the first 2 rounds, was setting up a clear path to victory, but the final 3 rounds were not so obvious, the 3rd round being the most uncertain. When it was all said and done, the majority of media members and fans called it a robbery, and not in the sense of being butthurt about their boy not pulling through, but simply, Holloway just seemed to be the better competitor on the night. The Weasel would break down the fight in his usual fashion, concentrating on the contentious round, and he in fact would score it in favour of Volkanovski. And to be fair to the reigning champion, in the rounds that mattered most, the championship rounds, he proved to be the better force. But there is only one opinion that matters, and that is the judges. Holloway was shut out of his bid to become a champion once more, and his place in the division became uncertain. For Volk though, he had proved that he belonged on the throne for the meantime. With no chance of a rubber match considering his 2 victories against Max, he now set his sights on the next contender to the belt, and one had re-emerged. After returning to the sport after some time away, Brian Ortega had secured victory against the Korean Zombie in an extremely impressive performance, but one in which he would be introduced to the nightmare fuel that is bold Ortega. Brian was a marketable guy, charismatic, did good numbers on social media, and was a fan favourite with his fighting style. The UFC saw the potential in him, and so they decided to give both competitors a rare leg up in this industry. The pair would serve as coaches on the reality TV show The Ultimate Fighter and its 29th season, and for those who had been blind to Volk's charismatic personality up until this point, were about to be forcibly exposed to it. The season was alright, I guess. Both men were just kind of nice guys, and so there was never really any tension, and the fighters on the actual show were just, well, not really entertaining or even really good, to be honest. I mean, here we go. Dustin Lamporos, Ryder Newman, Daniel Argueta. Do you know any of these men? No? Well, yeah, exactly. Normally the reality TV show produces some really decent names, but all we got was Brian Battle, which, not so bad if you ask me, but long gone were the days of the show producing literally 24 new blokes who would go on to become not only ranked, but sometimes even champions of the world. This season just stank, but it did serve as a good ad for Volk and Ortega's upcoming matchup, which was eventually scheduled for September at UFC 266 in 2021. The matchup was pretty nice, to be honest. It would be the first time that we would see Volk face a legitimate submission threat, but even still, Volk led as the clear favourite heading into the fight.
Alexander Volkanovski versus Brian Ortega. I'm going to be going with Alexander Volkanovski here. I mean, he's just next level. I mean, watching what he did to Holloway in hindsight now to what Holloway did to Calvin Kattar, it's hard not to pick Alexander Volkanovski here against Brian Ortega.
I'm going to be a real problem for him tomorrow because he looks uncomfortable right now.
I got Brian Ortega, but I got a little inside baseball here. I went and saw a training camp. There was only 3 guys in the room. It was Brian Ortega, Juan Archuleta, Win was the sitting Bellator world champion, and the great TJ Dillashaw. They did a round robin. I can't share what I witnessed. I only share with you. Ortega is dynamic. I believe he's going to lose some rounds, but I believe he's going to hit something, ultimately cut or put the champion down. I think he's going to do it in the 4th round. How do you like that for specifics, Ian?
After this is over, do you think you can sit down and have a pint, be a good acquaintance, or is this going to go beyond this fight?
To be honest, I would have to be pretty drunk to get along with him, I think. I'll be honest again, obviously I'm known to be respectful, but there's just things that annoy me, and that's that, so yeah, probably not.
Volkanovski
jab.
He stopped.
He might go to sleep. The grip is broken.
That was a fight you couldn't call because Ortega almost won twice with 2 insane submissions.
Volk would piece up Ortega for 2 rounds straight, Bryan's face slowly becoming distorted and twisted with crimson as the overwhelming pressure of Volk's precision mounted. But halfway through the third, Ortega would land a crisp straight that set Alex on his ass, and in one of the smoothest transitions I've ever seen, Ortega snatched the reigning champ's neck in a mounted arm and guillotine, the panic immediate in Volk's desperation, kicking and fluttering with his legs, his head slowly turning pink as the oxygen was slowly squeezed out of his body. The commentators said it was over. I turned to those watching with me, mouth ajar. We knew it was over too. The crowd's scream also suggested this was it, and knew. Yet as darkness crept in from the suffocation, Alex found a way to survive. Somehow, some way. It was unexplainable, yet there was resolve buried deep in Alex's spirit, unearthed in a moment of desperation. And not only that, he reversed the position, and wouldn't you know it, the submission specialist once again put him in a tight, fight-ending triangle choke, locked up, ready to declare a new king of the division. And yet even in the face of yet another losing position, Volk triumphed. He had almost lost the fight twice in a matter of minutes, and not only did he end up ending the round in a flurry of punches from top position, he on all but one judge's scorecard won the round. Truly unbelievable to be so close to defeat and yet prevail. By that point the fight was done. Ortega had waned mentally. The last 2 championship rounds were a wash. Volk's victory inevitable, another ruby in the belt, another challenger destroyed, and Volk's ascent continued. And it is this fight that manifested in physical flesh the legend that was Bold Volk, embracing his receding hairline, his newfound mysticism, with it chiseling his name into MMA memes for the next decade. I feel like it was this fight that was the true turning point for fans, a real moment where it became clear that Volk was the sweetheart of the people. His YouTube channel had started to take off, and the cheers from the crowd were louder than ever. His next fight would prove pivotal, a chance to really hammer home his place atop the sport. Zombie, after losing his title to Jose way back in 2013, would return home, saddened by the loss, and it is here where he would have to commit 2 years of his life to his home country's national service, 2 years in the South Korean army. Because he was injured, he was granted a clerical role in the city, but because of the hours he had to work, he was unable to train to the standard that he had for the last decade, and so because of the injury in the national service, we wouldn't see Young for a rather frustrating 4 long years. 4 years in which he slowly slipped from the division's rankings, from the #1 contender to nothing at all. It was a sad time to say the least, but in late 2016, his return was booked. Zombie would make up for lost time, knocking out top 10 ranked Dennis Bermudez in the first round, and would carry on the momentum by edging out Yair Rodriguez in a back and forth 5-rounder. Well, there was until the very last second of a fight that Zombie was handily winning. Yair, out of pure desperation and creativity, would unleash one of the wildest knockouts the sport would ever see, back elbowing the Zombie in a last-ditch effort and coming away the victor. Young would reflect on the loss a few days later, releasing a rather devastating Instagram post stating, "I do not have an excuse. I am so sorry to all of you who helped me. Thank you. Congratulations to those who hate me also. I have to be in hospital for the next few days. I have not been able to get on the plane yet. I'm ashamed. I'll go back and see you soon." It was tough to hear a fighter be so negative after such an incredible performance, and if anything, that fight will forever be etched into the history books. He was certainly nothing to be ashamed of. Despite being so close once more to a title, Young would have to go back to the drawing board, coming back the following year and getting 2 incredible performance of the night knockouts against top-ranked opponents in Frankie Edgar and Renato Moicano, once again sparking hopes of a title shot. But in a cyclical tale, Zombie would be shunted down the rankings in a battle of the mythical fighters when he took on the accursed bold Ortega, returning to the sport after a 2-year hiatus. Ortega's return to the sport was masterful, leaving Zombie once again distant from the title. As we know, Ortega would go on to fight Volk, and after taking a year to recover, Zombie would come back with a dominant performance against number 8 ranked Dan Ige, a win that was secured in such a time when the featherweight division was in dire straits. Bold Volk, accursed bold Ortega, and no sparring Holloway, mythical fighters in their own rights, had culled all contenders from the division, meaning that coming off of just one win, but a legacy of violence, the Korean Zombie was granted his second shot at the title, and for Volkanovski, well, this was his third defense and another chance to claim a ruby.
But I guarantee you, I'm going to keep improving. Next time you see me, I guarantee I'm going to be a level ahead. Again, I keep raising the bar. That's what I expect. I know I'm levels ahead of these guys, but you know, the best always want to improve themselves. They don't want to be better than the other guys. Just being better than the other guys isn't good enough. I want to be better than I was last month.
There hasn't been many times in a title fight where I've felt truly sorry for a fighter, but this has to be one of those occasions. Volkanovski dismantled the Korean Zombie over 4 brutal and bloody hard-to-watch rounds. Not only was the entire fan base calling for the fight to be mercifully ended, but so were the commentators. Whilst Volk was unable to knock the Zombie out, he did quite literally everything else, and that fact just stood as a testament as to why they call Young the Korean Zombie. He took everything, wobbling all the way. The ref eventually just stopped the fight. Zombie still standing, the ref probably wanting Zombie to remember his glory days when he grows old, not a life riddled with CTE rocking back and forth in a nursing home. Volk, well, he looked unstoppable, unbeatable, technically perfect, and his performance was perhaps one of the greatest that he had ever produced in his now 21-fight winning streak, a collection of wins not lightly earned, but rather against the best the world has to offer. Volk had done what those featherweight greats had done before him, clearing out the division, and the UFC would have to break one of their rules in order to provide the next carcass for Volk to roast on his cooking show, and that would come in the form of a trilogy. Despite one party losing twice already, on January 6th, it was announced that Max would be taking on Volk for his third shot at reclaiming his belt, and in the years that he had been separated from it, Max had done nothing but prove he deserved redemption. After losing to Volkanovski the second time, and seemingly shutting himself out from ever getting a title shot against the Australian ever again, Max decided to make it his personal mission to eradicate any top contenders that vied for his own title shot. It started with one of the greatest performances the sport will ever be graced with. Max stepped in against New York's finest and battered him from bell to bell, proclaiming along the way that he was the best boxer in the UFC, one of the most glorious moments the sport would ever bear witness to, one that will be remembered eternal as time ticks callously on. It's hard to really sum up how important these rare moments in the sport truly are. It's burned into the zeitgeist of the sport. When people ask, why do you watch this thing? Why do you love it? You point to Max staring at the commentary team, dodging punches, screaming that he's the best boxer in the UFC, and no one can talk that down. It's why people love Max ultimately. He creates these viral moments, not forcibly, but just by the very nature of his character. He followed up this performance with his second fight of the night in a row against number 3 ranked Yair Rodriguez in the main event of a fight night. With it, Max had once again cemented his position as number 1, and Volk had now no choice but to pick up the gauntlet that Max had laid at his feet, with one act of violence at a time.
Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 3, the trilogy, takes place this weekend in the co-main event of UFC 276. This one is to determine, in my opinion, the greatest featherweight of all time.
I've already beat him twice. I still feel like this is a really big fight for me and my legacy.
Do what I do best, figure out the way, find out what he improved at, shut it down and get the job done. Yeah. That's as simple.
But I do think it's going to take a pretty damn perfect performance for Max to wrest the belt away.
Let him have him. Let him have it.
Let him have it.
Oh, good.
I can hear you to the noise.
All day. Hey, you can use them as much as you want. Saturday night, it ends for you. That's
Saturday
it.
night, we get to find out.
2-0, baby.
Saturday night,
Remember that. 2-0.
Let's go.
Bring the heat.
I am the fucking heat, brother. I am the heat, brother. I am the heat, brother. I am the heat, brother.
I mean, we've never seen Holloway this busted up before.
No, and we watch Max Holloway fight right now. He's not fighting a bad fight. Alexander Volkanovski is just fighting at a different level.
And still
Round after round, the story unfolded with brutal clarity. Volkanovski's dominance was clear, suffocating any of Holloway's attempts to pull ahead in the fight. Max fought with heart, but Volk still triumphed, 50-45 across all judges' scorecards, a complete and utter shutout. This time there was no razor-thin margin. It was clear as day. Alex had made the adjustments required, and Max had no answers. It was a definitive end to the Holloway chapter, and all lingering questions, all controversies, all hanging asterisks had been eviscerated. Alex was now undisputed, standing alone at the top of the featherweights. For Max, the man who had once danced through the division with untouchable grace, now faced a harsher truth. His prime, the golden era, had faded, and the twilight of his career had descended around him, or so it seemed for the meanwhile. He stared into the void of what might have been, and only he could untangle amidst the gloomy cosmic web truths as to what future he wanted to manifest. Was this it? Was there a fire still burning deep? In time, all would be revealed, but for now, there was naught but the somber sting of defeat. For me, it was the night that the octagon bore witness to the delicate nature of greatness. It hangs on the razor's edge, threatening to slip out of reach from competitors who both seek eminence. Combat reveals all, and it is, as destined, most honest judge of a man's resolve. You cannot hide from its revealing truth. You either were or were not. Volk emerged the better man for a third time, as it were, and it was without question now. He was the greatest featherweight the world had ever known, greater than Holloway, greater than Conor, and now greater than Aldo. What lay ahead of him? Well, that was the question. I don't know what it is about the featherweights, but they over the years have produced men who simply separate themselves from the pack. Jose had dismantled almost everyone, Holloway had carried that on, and now here was Volk. The top 5 had consumed themselves, and any top contender that they managed to spit out was shunted back down with ease by Volk. It was hard to really paint a picture of what it was like to watch Volk at this time. He was technically on another level. He mixed the martial arts better than we had ever seen before, and he was a viable threat in almost any position that he was put in. Not only that, he had the one thing that cannot be taught, cannot be trained: heart, a resolve to achieve victory no matter the odds, no matter the danger. As far as the Australian was concerned, there was always a path to victory, always a chance, that willpower to find his reign, visible in every call to violence. This concoction of attributes produced, understandably, the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world, a place where Volk had sat pretty for some time. The man behind him in the pound-for-pound rankings was Islam Makhachev, Khabib's prodigy, and one of the most terrifying forces the lightweight division had ever seen. He was the current reigning 155-pound champion, and a man who on his path to claiming that belt had decimated all ranked opponents that stood in his way. Submission after submission, finish after finish, he was by all accounts well on his way to achieving lightweight greatness, and well, Alex wanted a piece of him, outsized and counted out. Volkanovski clearly feared nothing. He called for his shot at a second belt. The fans drooled at the speculation of the matchup, and Dana White just about creamed himself at the prospect. It was the most tantalizing, most ridiculous, most talent-rich bout the UFC could offer at the time, and it didn't take long for the ink to dry on the contract. UFC 284, Australia, the crucible for greatness was staged, and it wouldn't be the UFC without milking an opportunity. Conveniently placed as the co-main event was a rather tired and overused and frankly out-of-place opportunity. A featherweight interim title was put up for grabs for 2 top contenders, Josh Emmett and Yair Rodriguez was bizarrely provided a shot at second place gold. This interim title, in all the ones that had been graced in the featherweight division, had to be the most egregious. A title eliminator as all the bout was. But no, the UFC had to pull the wool over our eyes and put this pretend belt on the line. Volk was ready to go straight back down, win or loss, to defend his featherweight belt, but the UFC naturally saw things differently. Some interim championships are legit, and some others less so. This one was more of the latter, and so to be honest with you, I'm not going to dwell on it too much in this video essay. Yair had been a prospect from the moment that he had stepped foot in the octagon. I still remember all the way back in 2015 and 16 that the UFC was really trying to push him onto the fans, and for good reason really. He was flashy and he backed it up. After head-kicking Andre Fili back to California, he would be placed in a main event. This was, by the way, in his 4th ever UFC fight, rare indeed for any man. Winning that, he would go on to his 2nd main event against UFC legend BJ Penn, a man washed up on the shores of a brutal legacy that had evidently eroded his body. Penn wasn't the same man that had ruled over 2 different divisions, and so it was no surprise that the young and hungry Mexican would go on to TKO the Hawaiian warrior. Yair, however, would go on to be fraud-checked in a title eliminator of sorts against Frankie Edgar. The UFC vet from New York would show that Yair had essentially zero wrestling, and he would need to go back and work on himself a little bit. It was a disappointment for the UFC, who wanted to see him succeed, and had spared no expense in promoting the Mexican fighter. Yair would come back and put on a pretty good win streak, only to fall short once again when it mattered most, this time against Max Holloway, who was also looking for his own return to the belt. After that, Rodriguez would pick up a controversial win against Ortega, who was coming off of his loss against Volk. And so it was here Yair was offered, on a 1-fight win streak, a shot at UFC interim gold. Emmett, on the other hand, was far more active, a UFC vet in his own right, fighting since 2016. He had only lost 2 out of his 11 fights in the UFC. Josh had hands of stone, a constant knockout threat, and a man not afraid to put on a performance or a fight of the night. He had more than earned his shot at a title, currently riding a 5-fight win streak against the best the featherweight had to offer. UFC 284 was a pay-per-view destined to be remembered, the main and co-main event, crossroads for many fighters' legacies. All that was left to be done was to fight.
Alexander Volkanovski, if he wins this fight, is going to do it by KO. We're just gonna have to suck it up and deal with it. Alexander Volkanovski fans, we've got a couple more days. The walls are closing in.
There's a healthy amount of people picking Volkanovski to win this one. I don't see it, man. Makhachev's too big, too strong for him. He's just too good at grappling, man. They've been grappling since birth.
The Ultimate Fraud Championship between Yair Rodriguez. These men may just be the least deserving contenders the UFC has ever gotten together and put a belt on the line for it, because the Green Goblin Josh Emmett is going to be fighting Little Lord Fauntleroy, the world's biggest spoiled brat, Yair Rodriguez. These guys are the epitome of handed to, not earned.
5 years since you fought here in Australia. This time, however, you are the man on the billboards. You're the man on the posters. Has this lived up to everything that you dreamt about for this fight week?
All that. Let him think he's invincible. Let him push that narrative. Say these guys are unstoppable, because that just makes my victory even bigger. So I'm a ride with that narrative and just show you what I can do and shock the world.
He's got real good takedown defense, and he can take guys down, but he's not the biggest guy even at 45.
I don't agree with the decision. I'm not going to call it a robbery. I just believe that Alexander Volkanovski won that fight based on damage. I'm not going to take it away from Islam Makhachev. He had a great performance, but let's be real. The real great performance of this fight was Alexander Volkanovski.
Alexander Volkanovski is the best fighter on the planet. And despite him not getting his hand raised, I do not have to bump him out of the top 5 based on how close of a fight he had with Islam and arguably winning the fight.
The contest for the lightweight throne was a masterpiece. Two men created art on the other side of the chain-linked fence. Technicality and heart splayed onto the canvas. Volkanovski pushed Makhachev to the brink, a place we had never seen the Dagestani fall to. Over 5 grueling rounds, the pair duked it out for not only a title, but for pound status. And shockingly, fans and analysts the world over scored the bout narrowly, like unbelievably narrowly. Many even believing Volk deserved the judge's decision. The official scorecards, 48-47, 48-47, and 49-46. It reflected the closeness of the bout, and the loss couldn't erase the sheer quality of fighter that Volkanovski displayed that night. His ability to hang with one of the most suffocating fighters in the sport on all levels, whilst moving up in weight, solidified his status as one of the greatest fighters the world had ever known. Volkanovski's legacy at the time was defined not only by an undefeated featherweight record in the UFC, but also his versatility as a technician of the sport. He had already conquered the featherweight division, dispatching legends and top contenders with ease. The Makhachev fight was a gamble indeed, a chance to become a 2-division champion and cement an untouchable status in the sport. Losing didn't erase or diminish anything that had come before. Instead, it showcased a rare kind of greatness, the courage to risk it all when the cards are stacked against you, a stylistic nightmare in Islam, and he strode into that fire and still emerged the other side in a way that left no doubt about his skill or position in the sport. And so when the rankings were released the Wednesday following, remarkably, he remained the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. That for me is what will perhaps define Volk's career when it is all said and done. He may not have won on the scorecards, but in our hearts, he earned his flowers in due. Regardless, losing stings. That fact can never be washed away over any accolade. For an athlete like Volkanovski, who had tasted victory so consistently, that pain of defeat was visceral. You could see it in his post-fight demeanor, gracious, yet pained. Yet for the greatest of warriors out there, loss is only a fuel to a fire. Fighters like Volk don't shrink from defeat, they learn from it, and they certainly weaponize it. And so there was little point wallowing in defeat. Alex was still the champ after all, and now Yair played an active threat to Alex's disputed world title at 145 pounds. There was no other option. A flashy, rangy, and impressive striker now stood to take everything away from Volk. Alex promised activity, and he was about to be a man of his word. At the start of April, the unification bout was confirmed to take place at UFC 290 in July.
That's probably the most feared I've ever been in a fight, maybe. Like him and maybe Max. This was because I always say no one can beat me. No one can actually beat me. I don't believe anyone can beat me. But everyone has a puncher's chance. Everyone can catch you.
With his victory over Yair, Alexander Volkanovski stood alone, the undisputed king of the featherweight division. The crowd's roar in victory dissolved into a hollow hum in the back rooms of the stadium, though. It is in that silence that followed, a question clawed at him. What was next? His path to the peak of this sport had been unforgiving. Beating Max 3 times had stripped away Holloway's bid to call himself the greatest featherweight. That title now sat firmly with the man from Australia, and any uncertainty as to Volk's skills had been silenced with every victory since then. Against Brian Ortega, he had felt the void close in, the guillotine tightening, until his vision vignetted in a creeping dark blur, only to claw his way back to achieve victory, his heart for all to see. And Yair was another ruby that proved even the new generation of fighters did not belong with him. Each win built his legacy, but each one took something too, I guess. A piece of his body, lost on the training room floor and on the canvas of the octagon. This sport isn't about longevity, it erodes, it destroys, and every man's time standing in the sun does come to an end after all. They called him Alexander the Great, his empire sprawling across the featherweight realm, and there is only one truth of empires: they don't endure. Out there, beyond the lights, there is always someone grinding, sweating in the dim bowels of a gym, dreaming of dismantling another's dream. Alexander could feel it, a quiet threat that crept closer. The universe was already writing the next chapter of this featherweight division. Alex ruled, yes, but the crown laid heavy upon his head. Ilia, since his very first fight, had always been surrounded by eminence. He stands shoulder to shoulder before his MMA debut with another great, another legend.
What about this Arnold Schwarzenegger tournament? Arnold fighter? What was that all about?
Ilia looks nervous, but he must focus now. He makes his walk for the first time as a professional to the cage. His road to getting here was paved in sporting excellence. He had been a national champion in Greco-Roman wrestling, and shortly after moving to Spain from his home country of Georgia, had taken up jiu-jitsu and MMA. Now at the age of 17, he makes his walk to prove his worth in the blood game.
I always say, like, Arnold is watching the MMA because of me.
Wow.
Because I had a really great performance. I did a suplex. And
with the first taste of victory, Ilia knew that a life of violence is what he was destined for. He would continue his dominant rise in the sport.
Ilia Topuria!
After 3 years in the sport, not only had Ilia remained undefeated, but he had also ducked and dived around different weight classes. After escaping the regional scene in Spain, he moved down to bantamweight, winning his first fight in the weight class, which then gave him the opportunity to fight for top British promotion Cage Warriors bantamweight title. But unfortunately, he would miss weight and then be ineligible to claim the strap, even in victory, of which he handily achieved. Ilia had started his journey alongside his brother, Alex, who had gone 2-1, and seeing Ilia's prowess, decided to stop his own career in order to become the greatest training partner he could for his brother. Ilia's first few fights only served to strengthen his confidence. He knew he was destined for so much more.
¿Te piensas el mejor de España ahora mismo, libra por libra?
Por supuesto que soy, no pienso el mejor.
¿De Europa?
Aunque dentro de mí yo pienso, ahora mismo no lo he demostrado, como por ejemplo en España yo pienso que lo he demostrado.
Creo que voy a estar al final del 2018 en la UFC. Ahora, que no vaya a estar, será el año que viene, pero es lo que yo realmente pienso. Todo para estar en la UFC. Tengo las ganas, tengo la edad, podría estar peleando ahora mismo en la UFC.
Y lo demostraré. Yo no solo pienso que soy el mejor de Europa, pienso que soy el mejor del mundo. Solo necesito un poco más de tiempo para demostrarlo.
This year would also see Ilia become the first Georgian black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Ilia, at such a young age, was already a pioneer, and the future looked extremely bright. His success on such a great platform in Cage Warriors would see him signed to Middle Eastern standout organization Brave FC, a fantastic company which serves as a crucible for future UFC legends to make their name. Ilia would not disappoint. 2 victories, 2 devastating finishes.
Triangle elbow combination, and it's over at 1 minute and 15 seconds of the very.
Ilia had outgrown the regional MMA organizations. There was now no longer any doubt in his mind that he deserved to be in the UFC.
Quedaban 2 peleas más en el contrato, pero dije, mira, si yo consigo salirme del contrato, sé que la UFC me va a firmar.
Ilia's management company would get him out of his contract with Brave and sign immediately with UFC. He was expected to fight within the first couple of months of the contract, but almost within days of the ink drying on the contract, the matchmakers would call him with a short notice opportunity.
Me llaman y me dicen que si el mismo día de que tenía el vuelo para ir a Estados Unidos quería pelear en la UFC, pero en Abu Dhabi, en 8 días. Las oportunidades no te vienen todos los días, y menos así, ¿sabes? Esto es mi sueño y me da igual que tenga 8 días, yo voy a aprovechar mi oportunidad. y ahí empezó toda la historia.
A bout between Yusuf Zalal and Zhong Wu Choi was expected to take place on October the 11th at Fight Night Moraes vs Sandhagen, but Wu Choi was pulled from the card, leaving a spot empty on 8 days' notice. This was what was offered to Ilia. At the time, Zalal was riding a 3-fight win streak in the UFC and was a well-respected prospect on the regional scene, and then had gone on to prove his worth in the premier organization. There was no doubt that this was an extremely difficult fight to take on such short notice for Ilia, but he just saw it as an opportunity to make a statement for his debut.
The totals are all the same, 29-28 for your winner by unanimous decision. He is still undefeated, Ilia Topuria.
With that win, Ilia Topuria did more than just announce himself in the UFC. He had made it clear that he was a problem. Taking a fight on 8 days' notice is one thing, but going on to dominate is another thing entirely. For all of Zalal's skills, the prospect was just simply not ready for the ferocity that Topuria brought inside of the cage. What people didn't know was that just a week before being offered the fight, Ilia had contracted the virus, and still, despite this, took the fight.
My UFC debut, I test positive like 10 days before the fight, and I didn't say anything.
Right.
I get short notice fight.
Yeah, 8 days, right?
That's not an excuse.
There was no doubt in my mind that C19 would have destroyed his cardio and affected any training that he could possibly have squeezed in before stepping in against Zalal. It just spoke to the extreme self-belief that Topuria had in himself. El Matador had proven his worth in his debut, and well, this was just the beginning. Just 2 months later, Ilia would return to the octagon to face two-time UFC vet Damon Jackson for a bout to take place on December 5th. Jackson was the former LFA featherweight champion and held a record of 17-3. He was a viable threat with a wicked ground game, owning many finishes via submission. It was now just an opportunity for Ilia to show what he was capable of with an actual full camp.
Which is good to see. He knows he wants to be able to come over here and be a star. I mean, he's just unloading on Damon Jackson right now with all combinations. Those body shots have now officially now set up the headshot. It's all over.
Halfway through the first, Ilia would land a devastating uppercut, and as Jackson stumbled back, Ilia sensed blood in the water. It closed the distance, hammering Jackson with a relentless combination. Jackson waned, unable to recover, and then Ilia uncorked a fight-ending right hook that sent Jackson peacefully into the Shadow Realm. The way that he had dispatched Jackson with such violence had put fans on notice. They may call him El Matador, but to me, this fight made him out to be the bull. Full camp Topuria was terrifying to say the least, and good luck to the next man who had the pleasure to stand across from him in the octagon. 7 months later, Topuria would be announced to be taking on TUF 22 winner Ryan Hall, riding his undefeated UFC streak, an impressive 8-1 record. Ryan was more well known for his jiu-jitsu prowess though, a wizard on the mat. Ryan Hall was a submission artist to the highest order, crazy, unpredictable, and often utilizing unseen techniques that had left many top fighters puzzled in the middle of fights. But his game plan was no secret. In honor of Dark Souls, Hall would come out of the gate, Imanari rolling toward his opponents with the hope of tangling them up and then submitting them from there. Hall had actually achieved viral success previous to his time in MMA when in 2011 he was captured in a very high-viewed video of him subduing a larger and aggressive man in a pizzeria, hailed by jiu-jitsu fanatics worldwide as a great use case. Ryan's deep knowledge of jiu-jitsu and his penchant for pulling off submissions from seemingly impossible positions had earned him a reputation as a puzzle, but Topuria was there not to solve it, but instead destroy it.
Ryan Hall versus Ilia Topuria takes place this weekend on the prelims of UFC 264, Poirier versus McGregor 3, and I can't wait for this featherweight bout. Two streaking contenders, not quite ranked yet in the featherweight division. Ryan Hall was ranked, but because of his inactivity, he's now fallen out of those rankings. So the winner of this one, in my opinion, is definitely going to be ranked in the featherweight division, and I think the winner of this one is going to be a real problem for the rest of the featherweight division as well.
Of course, I'm going to try to be in stand-up all the time, but I have no problems to go with him in the ground, because if you see him, he has 4 fights inside the UFC, and he has just one submission against a BJ Penn who wasn't
the same guy.
Excited. I think Ilia's a great opponent. He's very tough. You know, he brings a lot of skills to the table. And Topuria, I looked up who he was. I'd seen him fight prior. He's a very tough guy. I came here to fight the best. He represents a great challenge and a great opponent, and that's why I signed up immediately. I don't turn down fights. If you're good, if you're tough, I don't care who you are. I will fight you.
Like, look at this. Like, he just falls down. Oh, there it is. Nice hammer. Oh, big hammer fist by Topuria. There it is. Shot of the
Declaring the winner by
The grappler who had baffled and bewildered fighters for years had met his match in the form of Ilia, a fighter whose raw violence had smashed through the fog of war of Ryan's elusive game, one brutal hammer fist at a time. In the midst of Joe Rogan's Glaze session on Hall, Topuria went fearlessly into the guard of one of the division's greatest submission threats and smashed his foe into unconsciousness. Ilia seemed oddly relaxed throughout the bout. Most men who had stepped into the cage with Ryan up until that point were extremely wary of his approach to a bout, but Ilia had had some special help that had made him unnaturally confident. His brother had been there every step of the way, guiding and molding Ilia into the perfect fighter.
Yo la suerte que tengo es de tenerlo porque él imita a cualquier oponente mío y mejor. Él me los hacía con una velocidad, pero 10 veces más que el mismo Ryan Hall. Estaba acostumbrado y había entrenado con un tío que era mejor que él haciéndolo, entonces era imposible que me ganara.
And now, with the victory cementing his place in the top 15, both Alex and Ilia had decided that Alex needed to restart his own career in mixed martial arts. Coming back to the fight game, Alex would make a statement. Those years working hard in the training rooms with his brother had turned him into a viable threat. Now the brothers would ascend through MMA together.
¿Le ha dicho que pare o le ha dicho que le está pegando detrás de la nuca? Ah, la palmeado.
Ilia had stamped himself into the top 15 with a devastating performance, a well-deserved placement after dispatching such a threat. In just 3 fights, Ilia had fallen into the limelight, not only for fans, but now the top echelon of the division. It was no wonder that the UFC now wanted to test his mettle against those very men. 13th ranked undefeated Mosvar Evloev was the first to sign on the dotted line, but would quickly be pulled from the bout and replaced by Canadian standout Charles Jourdain. But the bad luck would continue. Topuria, just hours before weigh-ins, would be pulled from the card due to medical issues relating to the weight cut. After this devastating news, Ilia was desperate to get back into the octagon, bugging the matchmakers, but they told him, if you really want to fight, then your next opportunity might just have to be a weight class up, a tall order, and a massive risk. But 2 months after his failed matchup, an opportunity presented itself. After Mike Davis pulled out of his matchup with Jai Herbert due to the ridiculous amount of tax he would have to pay for fighting in the UK, I totally understand, by the way, because I live in this fucking country, Ilia stepped in on relatively short notice, upper weight class, to take on a surging contender of a Brit in Jai Herbert, a tall, rangy sniper of a fighter who had previously been the lightweight Cage Warriors world champion. Ilia was desperate to get in the cage again and perform, and if this was all that was on the table, then so be it. I think the only thing that he wasn't expecting was to be getting into 2 fights that week.
Fuck you, bitch. Fuck you, bitch.
I can't believe he posted that video. He's made himself look so stupid. Saying, oh, I warned you. Well, you're the one what got hand sanitizer to bounce off your head, lad. I never got nothing happen to me. You didn't land a single punch.
A little thing that many people didn't know about the beef between Paddy and Ilia is that it had all started a year previously when Paddy had made some pretty outlandish comments about Topuria's home country of Georgia.
I want to fight him because of my people, because of me, you know. I want to take his head off.
Considering Paddy's popularity at the time, after the scuffle, all fans' attention was pulled towards this hand sanitizer boy, this nobody, according to Paddy. Well, if you didn't know who he was, you were about to.
Yo siempre digo que en esos momentos antes de salir a pelear, es como una confesión que tienes contigo mismo. Empiezas a recordar todo el camino que has tenido que recorrer para llegar hasta el punto donde te encuentras en ese momento y si te mereces la victoria o no.
He's a 45-pounder, and he said, fuck it, I'll take a fight at 55. He gets head kicked in the first round. You're like, he's in real trouble. He got dropped. and he scrambled, got a hold of him.
Siempre, cada vez que llego en mis combates, es como que hice lo necesario para merecerme la victoria. I had a tough first round. I was surprised because he was really fast. But in the second round, I take his head off. That's all I remember.
Ilia's right hook sent Jai Herbert's head into orbit, something that one man would argue is impossible.
Me and my mama will tell you right now this earth is flat.
Flat earther Bryce Mitchell had entered the UFC 3 years previously after coming up short on The Ultimate Fighter, but despite this setback, he would go on to outgrapple and outwork his opponents, working his way up the featherweight rankings one win at a time. By the time Ilia was poised to take on the big game hunting, conspiracy-believing American, Bryce had become ranked 9th in the world and had amassed an impressive record of 15-0. For Ilia, it was finally his opportunity to break into the top 10 and cement his place as a true contender for the featherweight strap. The matchup was a battle over whose O had to go, a rarity in MMA, a crossroads for two fighters' legacy, made all the more so important by the fact that these two men were battling in the top echelon of the division, and the stage for their violence to manifest was the opening of the main card of an important pay-per-view. It was the perfect setup for the winner to build much needed hype. UFC 282 would also see Ilia cross paths with an old enemy, and the press conference would be hijacked in the most entertaining way by their rivalry.
I aspire to be champion Monday, so I need to do the same.
Please, loudly, shut up. If not, I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna crush your face right here.
Do it then, you little fart.
Have another question?
Do it then, you little do something, stand up. What'll you do? You'll do nothing. You'll do nothing, you little fart. Go and sit back down. Sit back
One
down.
final question for Bryce Mitchell in the back. Do you think Ilia's making a mistake focusing on Patty when he had his youth standing across him in the octagon?
Ilia said I'm a coward. Does a coward show up prepared to die? No. I'm no coward. I've already proved him wrong, and I'll prove him wrong again on Saturday.
It was time to fasten your seatbelts, or not, because this fight would unshackle a man from his O, leaving the other to continue his undefeated legacy.
This is a really, really good matchup, a very, very competitive matchup as well. And I'm leaning towards Ilia Topuria, but that doesn't mean I don't believe Bryce Mitchell has a chance, because this one is like you're leaning one way or the other. Who do you lean 51% in favor of, pretty much?
When it comes to his grappling, and I think ultimately that does favor Topuria. So ultimately my prediction for this fight, it is very close, but I'm ultimately going to have to go with Ilia Topuria, and I'm going to go by a 3rd round TKO.
What I love so much about this fight is typically, you don't get two undefeated young guys that get this deep. And then you got stunned. That's right.
As both fighters crossed the threshold of the chain-linked fence, they did so with the full knowledge that one of them would return with the first taste of defeat in their mouth. The first exchange was a blistering 3-piece combo from Topuria, and it set the mood for the entire fight. Ilia's power and speed and unrelenting forward pressure was just too much for Bryce to contend with. Every second that the clock ticked downward, his confidence would wane further. Wide-eyed and outclassed, Mitchell was ragdolled down to flat earth. There, the grappling specialist would be choked out, and with it, his undefeated record would be etched out of existence. Ilia's ascent continued, unobstructed, all the way into the top 10. El Matador's dominant win had also managed to eclipse Paddy's shine.
He says he's a sorcerer, they don't get knocked out.
The Scouser had won a controversial decision, and his denial of the lacking performance had turned fans against him.
Probably the best I've ever looked in the UFC.
Their feud would erode with time. The spotlight was now positioned firmly on what was truly possible for the Georgian, now ranked inside of the top 10 and gaining momentum in fan favour. All he realistically needed was a top-ranked opponent and a flawless performance, and one man fit the bill. For the first time in years, Josh Emmett with a bitter taste of defeat in his mouth after losing to Yair for the interim title just 4 months previously, decided to step into the octagon more than once in a calendar year. This was the perfect opponent for Ilia to stamp his place as the rightful next contender for the belt, and he was offered the perfect platform to conduct business, his first main event in the promotion. There was no doubt that Josh was the real hardest hitting 145er. The trail of unconscious bodies that he had left in his wake during his career was countless, but unfortunately, that meant his game was predictable, especially to a master tactician like Topuria. But with the great equalizer in Josh's hands, this was indeed an extremely dangerous fight for the Georgian. The UFC truly saw the writing on the wall. This was the final test. Could the rising star withstand the firepower of a seasoned vet? Could the old guard hold back the coming storm? With victory, Emmett would be put back in the win column, and it would be against a legitimate up-and-comer. And a win for Topuria, well, it would prove that he wasn't just a hype. He was inevitable.
When you look at him, where are his strengths and where are the holes where you can have success?
He's tough. That's why he's here. You know, he's in this position for a reason. He's really well-rounded, but you never know. It's like everyone's always the next champion, the next contender, the next big thing. This is going to be a tough test for him.
Just have to be worried about his hooks, nothing else. I couldn't care less about his wrestling or beating or ground game, even his boxing. So he had to be worried about my boxing, my wrestling, my grappling, about everything. So
you're an undefeated fighter. Is there any pressure on you?
I didn't feel any pressure for that. Anything. I don't feel anything. It's like a normal fight, you know, for me. I did this for my whole life. It's one more fight I'm gonna have tomorrow night, and I can't wait to get another victory.
I think Ilia Topuria is going to win this fight. It's a dangerous fight, but at the end of the day, Josh Emmett is a 38-year-old featherweight who, to be honest, is maybe making a little bit too quick of a turnaround after going to war with Yair Rodriguez.
It's achieving a goal that I have since I was a kid. The belt is waiting for me. The fans gonna enjoy a lot the energy I'm gonna bring, the style I'm gonna bring, fire I'm gonna bring inside that cage.
The judges score the contest 50-44, 50-42, and 49-45. The winner by unanimous decision, Ilia Topuria.
The scorecard was the most dominant I think I'd ever seen. 50-42 is as severe as a beatdown as they come. The fourth round was scored by one judge as a 10-7, unimaginable rarity in MMA, but Ilia's masterful, relentless, and crushing performance, combined with Josh's truly impressive heart, made a fight of the night to be remembered for a lifetime for MMA fans. Josh's face had been mauled, streams of scarlet gushed from the slices and cuts, the blood's path to dripping to the canvas, obstructed by bruises and welts. He had truly been outclassed by a man who walked away from the fight looking as fresh as he did entering the cage that night. 5 rounds they had fought, and now Ilia was every bit the more terrifying. He could knock you out, he could submit you, and now his cardio was without question. Even if you didn't succumb to his barrage, he wouldn't slow down. In fact, he would only grow more precise and more deadly as the rounds progressed.
I was faster than him, more powerful, everything. I was better than him tonight. That's why I beat him pretty easy.
Alex Volkanovski is obviously considered one of the best in the world. What do you do differently that means Alex will lose his fight to you?
There is nothing in this life that can break my mentality. I show it tonight, that no one can match my level of skill inside the cage. I know that I can finish anyone in this division.
He was, without a shadow of a doubt, the next in line. He had put on a masterpiece. Ilia called his shot on the microphone. He placed a rose in the center of the octagon, and the curtains closed to red. The statement was made, and now there was only one more. On October 9th, a bout between Ilia and Alexander Volkanovski was confirmed to take place in January of 2024, but just as quickly as it was put together, it would fall apart. A week before the announcement, Volk would be called to step up on just 10 days' notice to face Islam Makhachev for the lightweight throne once more, a call to action that more than likely should have been avoided. Whilst everyone wanted short notice Volk to be the new mythical fighter, it was sadly destined to fail.
Any fighter can weaponize pace and cardio without a training camp. It would be Volkanovski, but that does figure to be a tough proposition.
He would quickly find himself getting head kicked back down to featherweight by the formidable mountain dweller, and to be frank, it wasn't a surprise. In a game of inches, at such high talent, champions are the last people who should be putting their legacy on the line at such incredibly short notice. Champions are defined by their teams, by their intricate and precise preparations, and whilst you can forever carve out a section of history by dethroning a champion a weight class above on short notice, it does not mean that you should, nor have to. Nothing to lose is not applicable when a concussion or long-term injury is on the other end of it all. Volkanovski's openness after his defeat was the writing on the wall for a small group of fans.
I needed it. Again, obviously a lot of people will say it's for the money and all that, but it was much more than that. Like, you know what I mean? It is hard. Like, it really is hard for athletes. Sorry. I never thought I'd struggle with it, but I mean, like, for some reason, when I wasn't fighting or in camp, sorry.
Let's talk about what's next. I talk to the UFC and say, keep me busy. I say that because, again, I'm in my prime. I need a fight. A lot of people go, he needs a break, I don't need a break.
Alexander's need and desire and desperation to be back in the cage as soon as possible was overzealous at best, and at worst, a miscalculated mistake. After a brutal knockout, there is no question that the head needs rest, but regardless, the UFC and Volk would only push back his fight with Topuria 1 month to February rather than January of 2024, giving him essentially 3 months to recover from the concussion. This was especially dangerous considering the man that he would be standing across from, brash and hungry foe with something to prove, and the yearning to take everything away from Volk.
Trust me, I worked so hard for this one. I put my soul in this training camp. I worked and I don't plan to give an inch in that fight.
Despite Ilia having everything fans could dream of, from highlight knockouts and impressive performances, he still had his back against the wall going into the fight. Volk was the fan's sweetheart, and no opponent could derail that. The way that Ilia carried himself and talked all fight week long was met with resistance at every point by fans. People, for whatever reason, wanted to see Ilia lose. The long-reigning, charismatic, and consummate martial artist Volk had the entire sport behind him, and Ilia not only had to beat him, but turn the crowd to his favor. So the question was, could he do it?
You already know what's gonna happen. You just came ready for the retirement. I'm gonna take your head off. I'm gonna show you levels. I'm gonna warp the floor with you.
I'm gonna show you I'm the guy that's been on top of this division for so long. He doesn't stand a chance.
I'm gonna take a couple of pictures.
Yeah, take pictures now because you won't have it after. He took advantage of taking a photo with the belt and not until I teach you a lesson. Maybe one day you can be a great champion. I'm gonna kick your ass first. You'll learn your lesson. Maybe you can bounce back after that. But till then, get your hands off my belt.
La estrategia que voy a traer en la pelea, él no va a ser capaz de resolverlo.
Whenever you have a champion as dominant as Alexander Volkanovski, what you hope for is a challenger that's so imposing and so destructive that it makes you wonder whether or not he's going to be able to withstand this storm. That is Ilia Topuria.
That's a nice combination.
And good movement as well. He's not standing right in front of him. He's moving off the center line, cutting angles.
He knew what was coming. He felt my power.
feel so happy right now. They're gonna tell you you can do it. They're gonna knock you down and doubt you. But guess what? The only person you need to achieve anything in this life, it's yourself. Just trust yourself, work tirelessly, have faith, and everything is possible. Look at me. Look at me now. Look.
Ilia would knock out Alexander the Great within 2 rounds, as he had predicted. He called his shot, and he landed it. It was another somber moment for MMA fans. Suspicions realized. Volk had returned to the cutthroat game too quickly, not giving his chin a chance to heal and recover. The knockout would continue a curse that has plagued the UFC since records began. Those in title fights, 35 years and older, almost destined to lose. Old man Volk had rather ironically materialized his own joke into reality. The darker truth. The porcelain of Volk's best years had begun to crack, and now that bitter downward trend of back and forth wins and losses has more than likely begun. Although we are yet to find out, we feel it in our bones. Ilia, on the other hand, had predicted his eventual crowning moment. Not only had he changed his Instagram bio weeks before stepping into the cage, attempting to manifest this reality, he was also confirmed to Fight Week that he had a film crew following him around, creating a documentary entitled Road to Becoming Champion. Beyond that, he had also placed the belt around his waist during media day, spitting in the face of superstition. As far as Ilia was concerned, the fight was a mere formality. He had already won many months ago, and for what most mistook as arrogance, a thing that had soured many fans for whatever reason, wasn't. It was just confidence, unbreakable belief in himself to achieve the ultimate goal of any martial artist. By the time his Octagon interview had finished, I, for one, was sold. Ilia had made that impossible climb to the top with a story to sell it. Ilia had manifested years of hard work into a singular, spectacular, awe-inspiring moment, symbolically capped off with the 15th rose in the center of the octagon. The featherweight division now had a new man to rule, a new story cemented into greatness. He would post on Instagram following his victory with an inspiring message of overcoming doubt. Many will say you can't do it. They will knock you down and doubt you. But remember, the only one you need to achieve anything is yourself. Trust in yourself, have faith, and work tirelessly, because everything will come. It doesn't matter where you come from, if you know where you are going, and what's in front of you is much more important than what's behind you. Never, ever give up. Just stand up and fight. Ilia talked the talk and walked the walk, humble and gracious. Volk had broken our hearts, but I'm sure that both of their journeys' paths will cross once again. But for Ilia, an old shadow had cast itself over the throne once more. A warrior was looking for his unprecedented third shot at undisputed UFC featherweight gold.
To be the best, you gotta beat the best, and the best is blessed. They can come after me, baby, let's get it.
In Max's time away, since his last failed capture of the featherweight title, he had certainly not lost any fan favour. His first matchup that saw him fall back into the win column was against British prospect Arnold Allen, ending the Englishman's impressive 10-fight UFC winning streak. He would then follow it up with one of the more somber, yet still emphatic performances of the year with a devastating knockout of Chan Sung-jun, sending the Korean into retirement in his home country. The former 2-time title challenger that had had the whole of South Korea at his back for years had finally been eroded down by this brutal game, and seeing the writing on the wall, decided to go out in one last blitz of glory. He left the octagon whilst the crowd screamed his walkout music, The Cranberries' Zombie. It was one of those times in the sport that had me sitting there with a pit in my stomach and tears in my eyes. Zombie had put on some of the greatest performances the division had ever seen, and here he was, leaving the sport for good, used as fuel for Holloway's latest bid for championship gold. Max, with the win, had certainly proven that he was next in line for a title shot. That is, if Volk would lose the title, of course. And with his pending matchup against Topuria, Holloway would have to go run a side quest to keep himself busy. That would come in the form of an extremely exciting matchup against Justin Gaethje at UFC 300, about to take place at lightweight. They would be duking it out for the symbolic BMF title. These two men were certainly deserving of a chance to claim that title. With the moniker of the baddest motherfucker on the line, Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje clobbered each other for 5 rounds, and at 4 in the morning, hailing from the land of England, I was drifting slowly in and out of consciousness during the 4th and 5th. By some miracle of fate, I had managed to pin my eyelids open with just 20 seconds to go in the fifth. My brother, snoring next to me, he had succumbed to the torture that is staying up for a UFC event this side of the globe. Max, the man who was up on the scorecards, closed to the center of the octagon and pointed down at the canvas. It was happening. They were about to do the most BMF thing imaginable. Both men traded in the waning moments of the fight of the night bout, caution to the wind, and then just like that, the greatest moment in all my years of watching this sport had unfolded before my very eyes. A photo captured the moment, a photo that encapsulated everything that this sport stands for: the thrill and the agony, the winner and the loser, the expulsion of emotion as the realization that victory has finally been achieved after weeks and months of preparation, careful game planning and visualization, the understanding that perhaps this very moment will be remembered with reverence for years, and it was wrought onto the face of Holloway. It was, and is still, perhaps the greatest photo I'd ever seen. Ilia was in the crowd at that moment, and he looked as bewildered and terrified as all of us. He knew at that moment he was going to be taking on this savage. Fate was sealed. On July 29th, it was announced that Ilia's next title defense against Max was scheduled to take place at UFC 308 in late October of 2024. For Max, it was more than likely his last chance of claiming the featherweight belt, and any future shots at a belt would have to take place in the division above, a place where he was conveniently ranked also. For Ilia, Max just served as another legend to add to his legacy. Max famously had a chin of granite, none so more obvious than going 5 rounds with one of the hardest punchers in the UFC, Justin Gaethje. So the fight promised to challenge Ilia in ways that we hadn't seen before. Max wasn't just going to stand there and brawl like Emmett. This fight was destined to be a 5-round technical battle, and the question was this something that the newly minted champion could handle?
People keep saying that this new era is about to start and this and that and blah, blah, blah. Ilia Topuria is like 29, I think, I believe. Just because I've been around longer than him doesn't mean I'm an old guy, so I just can't wait, you know. The last time I checked, I was younger than Ilia and I had title defenses, so.
I have all the respect for him. He called me a fan. Yeah, I followed his career. I've been a fan. How can you not be a fan of Max Holloway, right? So he's been a great example for me, but now it's my time to be that example for the new generation.
You stay in the middle. If not, run away. I will catch you anyways. I will catch you.
We're days away.
Take you
days away.
Trust me.
We are days away.
Trust me. You're gonna wake up from a long sleep.
He grabbed him again. Leave him alone now. He's dropped him bad. Holloway's out. No.
In what was a moment that many felt to be impossible, the Hawaiian warrior was put unconscious by an ungodly, unending blitz by the Georgian. Ilia smelled blood in the water after rocking Holloway, and the subsequent barrage was ceaseless until the ruby in his belt was wrought with blood on the canvas. In shades of his previous performance, many fans were heartbroken to see their boy get laid to rest. But with the win, Topuria had silenced any last doubts that existed. He placed a rose in the center of the octagon, a symbol that his reign was unfaltering and his continued ascent unstoppable. This dream perhaps would have never been realized without the help and selfless dedication of his brother, who, as of this day, is in the UFC himself. Now, with a record of 5-1, we can sit back and enjoy the rise of yet another Topuria. Who knows, maybe he might make his way into the bantamweight history books himself. From the moment Ilia Topuria set foot in the UFC, his trajectory was none so clearer. It was to be violent, chaotic, and relentless. The Georgian-born, Spanish-raised wrecking ball tore through the featherweight ranks with a mix of what only can be described as brutal precision and an unshakable self-agency. Reality has done little to challenge that belief. His early fights were the foundations of which he built his contention to the belt. Yusuf Zalal, Damon Jackson, Ryan Hall, Jai Herbert, each of them presented different threats, unique puzzles, and each of them were razed to ash and dust. A rose lays with them now. Then came those ranked in the top echelon of the division, the true tests. Bryce wilted under the pressure, Josh swang at a spectre who simply was not there, and just like that, a rose was laid with them also. Volk and Holloway, the true, irreproachable manifestations of what it means to not only be a champion of the sport, but to be a champion of the people also. Their skills, unrivaled, their era-defining domination, undeniable. And yet, a rose was laid for them also. In back-to-back fights, Ilia had, in equal parts, broken our very hearts, and yet impressed us. Two sides of this most savage of coins that defines this sport. The thrill comes, and yet the agony surely follows. In a lot of ways, Topuria has fulfilled that space that Conor left in the division, the extreme confidence, the self-fulfilling prophecy realized on the grandest of stages. And unlike McGregor, who became materialistically distracted and subsequently tainted his legacy every step of the way, Ilia remained true to himself, grateful for what the universe had provided him, and has now become a symbol for what unwavering belief in yourself can provide.
Once again, I proved to myself that the manifestation, and if you are able to visualize the things and work really hard for them, you can bring it to reality without any doubt.
There are those who fight with skill, there are those who fight with heart, and then there are those who fight with something greater altogether. It is a force that cannot be measured, it cannot be trained, and it cannot be broken. A belief so strong that the world itself bends to its will. Before he had a belt, before the world knew his name, he carried the weight of an impossible dream, one not lightly dreamt. And what is faith, if not the ability to see the unseen? He now does not just wear the glimmering gold of a championship belt, he also wears his purpose for all to see. He fights not just for himself, but for those who need to see that faith is power, that words shape reality, that the moment you decide your destiny is the moment that the conspiracy of the universe begins, and through him, he calls others to believe too, because if him, then surely you. Like that man who had defined 2015 and 16, the man so many had compared Topuria to, Ilia now leaves the division behind. His journey continued in a story yet to be told. The featherweight division left to continue without him. On February 20th, Dana White took to Instagram Live to begrudgingly announce, amongst a slew of exciting matchups, that Ilia had vacated the featherweight title in pursuit of becoming a double champion in a heavier division. According to the UFC president, Ilia wants to leave the weight cuts in the past and feels that he has the ability to dismantle the current pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Islam Makhachev. Ilia's only statement since the news is simply, "Not like us." I think it takes a lot of courage and self-belief to willingly sacrifice the thing that not only legitimizes you as an athlete, but brings in that paycheck. Ilia dropped the championship belt regardless. How many men would do that? At the age of only 28, Ilia has already defined his place in the sport, but this move, well, it's just completely badass. And if he pulls it off, if he becomes a champion, dare I say it, I think that he surpasses Conor McGregor in terms of greatness. In turn, Volkanovski was awarded another chance at claiming the featherweight throne. A matchup with Diego Lopez was announced in the same brief. They would ultimately headline UFC 314, and on April the 13th, 2025, the pay-per-view would spit out the other side of it a new champion, a familiar face, but a new story to tell, and only time can unpick this fable. And before we wrap up my video and close my important final thoughts about the featherweight division, please make sure to check out today's sponsor, War Thunder, and get to blowing up them tanks. Play the game now for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile using my links in the pinned comment or video description. Those of you who haven't played War Thunder yet or are returning after a break of at least 6 months will receive a massive bonus pack on PC and consoles, including premium vehicles, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium access. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring. I've traced these men across years and countless stories. Their lives are spiraling helix of ambition and ruin. Their legacies don't stand alone though. They devour and nourish one another. An endless cycle of creation and destruction. There is no straight line here, no simple arc. Every strike landed as a gift to the next fighter's story. This sport illuminates that eternal return. Men chasing meaning, their triumphs and failures feeding into one another. If it wasn't evident before, it is now as we unravel this featherweight Ouroboros. Each fighter's tale is a segment of the serpent, biting into the one before, birthing the one after. To seek a single hero or villain is to miss the pattern. There is only the rhythm of victory and defeat, life and death, coiled into one unbroken ring. Jose Aldo carved the division from raw stone, his reign still spoken with admiration at the campfire as it spits embers of what had been. But his end fed into Conor's beginning. McGregor, a new paradigm of stardom. His 2015 triumph was a spark that burned quickly, a flash in the night. And yet the serpent continued to turn. Max Holloway was the hum of order beneath the chaos that Conor left in his wake, weaving a reign defined by heart, the charismatic man that had wilted men in the octagon, that destroyed their will, an unshakable resolve, and a positivity that healed many. His losses to Volkanovski, though, were a sacrifice of sorts, the fuel to propel a man to become quite literally the division's greatest force to this date. Yet the serpent, ever hungry, turned again. UFC 298, Ilia Topuria's right hand continued this endless cycle, and now we see Volkanovski ready to make that sacrifice again. Legacies don't stack upon each other, they spiral, locked in an eternal dance. One moment you're the head, devouring, the next, you're a tail consumed. Every fighter's story ends where another begins.